I think I do. I think that's been characteristic of President Bush from the outset in this administration.
Now, based on what you've heard in the briefing, no Iraqi resistance of any consequence, or, I beg your pardon, limited Iraqi response, says the Secretary of Defense. Surprised?
I'm not sure. First of all, I sort of agree with both Secretary Cheney and General Powell on it's a little too early to start putting this picture together. If Mick Trainor's right about the number of sorties, etc., reports from 2,000 sorties are going to take an awful long time to be sorted out, to be collated, etc. Nevertheless, it is true, as he said, that if there were any disasters or any really unexpected developments, they would know about those. They would know about bad news rather than good news. So I find the entire picture encouraging, but it's still awful early, like the election night. Still a little early for those computers to grind out the results, and we've got a big job ahead of us digging out the whole Iraqi military.
I agree.
No question.
I agree, and I can assure you we will not, I hope, make the mistake of projecting any of the results of this campaign based on the military equivalent of exit polls. Let me ask you one other question for the moment. It's a little after 6 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad. The sun is up. In fact, Baghdad radio is back on the air. We aren't hearing much from it except recitations from the Quran, which may well indeed be an indication of the somber mood at best that occurs in the country at the moment. But when first light comes after a major night operation at the moment, how does the military situation change?
The military situation,
yes,
per
sir.
se?
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, there will be a seriousness about their work today that was not there 24 hours ago. And any doubts, lingering doubts or otherwise, about American seriousness was going to happen, the war response, that's all dispelled. You'll now see professionalism set in on both sides in a great big way. You will see less enthusiasm, less bravado, and more determination and gritting of teeth and hunkering down.
So unless, again, I realize this is speculative, but unless the U.S. has had a massively successful first night, everything's going to be tougher on the first day after the first night.
Well, certainly people perform better and they react quicker and they are not surprised and they know more about what it's like from now on. If we have in fact had a very, very massive success today, then we will react accordingly and they will also. A little early to say that, though.
Okay, Admiral Crowe, thanks very much for joining us. Look forward to hearing from you again. I must confess that we have been sitting here with something of a desperate urge to know how the families of men and women serving in the Gulf have been reacting around the country to the news as it has been coming in now for only, believe it or not, a little more than 3 hours since we first heard those early reports of the attack on the western outskirts of Baghdad. We have managed to put together a little reaction from some of the families at Fort Bragg in North Carolina.
I was watching a program and all of a sudden all this came on and it just hit me. I'm hurting for my daughter. And my son-in-law is over there. And I'm just taking it hard because I got a son that he might be leaving soon.
We knew it was coming, but that didn't soften the blow.
My sister, you know, which is his niece, she's leaving tomorrow morning, and I had to come off and see her one last time. Hopefully I'll see her again. You know, I knew we had to do this. Just, I don't know why, really.
But if at any time you wish to leave us, you leave us. Oh.
Everyone will remember where they were when Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. Some turned to God as churches opened their doors tonight, as people flocked in looking for answers and solace. Others were glued to radios or television sets as the news began to sink in. And for some, the news was a grim awakening of just what waits for them as they get ready to ship out.
Yeah, I'm scared. I got family back home in Texas, and I'm ready to go fight and do my job, but I'm scared. I'm more worried about my troops that's already over there. Those are the ones I'm worried about. They're over there, and I should be there, and I've been doing a lot of work back here, and I think I should be there now with them.
We do not know who the reporter was in North Carolina, but our thanks to our affiliate station WTVD, and we will do our best as the night goes on to knit the country together as best we can electronically by getting response from the various corners of the country, from east to west, from north to south. Back to the State Department, John McCracken. Jack.
Peter, several things to comment on. First of all, one of the military observations that you have been kicking around throughout the night, the limited response from the Iraqis. The fact that this attack came at night and that the Iraqi Air Force has an extremely difficult time flying at night may account for at least part of the limited response. Also, of course, surprise. And the point that you were making just a few moments ago about what happens when daylight comes up. Remember that the Iraqis are capable, much more capable, of fighting in daylight than they are during the night. And when they can see aircraft coming in, then they can do the sorts of things that they were not able to do during the night. Even small arms fire can bring down American aircraft if they're coming in low and fast. That is one point. Now, here at the State Department, they have just given us some of the details of what has happened during the course of the day. The first country that was notified, called in early this morning, was Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia. The State Department asked him to please inform his government that the United States was going to go forward. Throughout the afternoon, Secretary Baker and others in the State Department began informing all the different countries that are part of the coalition exactly what time this operation was going to get underway. Secretary Baker was up in his office around 7 p.m. When the actual bombing began, he was watching ABC News and Gary Shepard's report. Then he knew that the world knew what the Bush administration had set into motion. There has been no response from the Iraqi government tonight at all. There was no response prior to this attack. As Secretary Cheney indicated, that was one of the prerequisites, that there were no last-minute feelers coming out from the Iraqis prior to this. The State Department is confirming there were not, and there still has not been.
Okay.
That was a good one. I was gung-ho the whole way. I saw the attack, and it was awesome. There were a lot of bombs going off.
What did it look like? What did it look like? Can you describe it?
It looks a lot like, lights, flickering lights, like Christmas lights or something like that when the AAA's coming up. And then shortly after that, it looks like some big bomb fireworks or something like that going off. It was an awesome display. It really was.
The F-15s then refueled, conducting what they call hot ship refueling, rearmed, and took off again to continue their sortie runs over Iraq and southern Kuwait. Incidentally, you could tell by the pods that are draped below the two wings and the fuselage that plane is on a longer distance mission because it's carrying extra fuel. Most of the pilots who we have heard from today said that they had a certain measure of pride from what they accomplished, that they experienced some anxiety, that they were a little bit nervous about what they were getting into, but after a short while felt very comfortable. A lot of them drew the analogy of playing in a big game. Once the kickoff begins and you get a rhythm down, not so bad. A lot of them said they experienced no air-to-air combat with Iraqi planes, that many of the planes fled or that they were destroyed on the ground. And you heard a few of them say that they experienced AAA, which is anti-aircraft and artillery fire from the ground. But again, all of the members of that last fighter wing, the first TAC fighter wing from Langley, Virginia, returned unscathed. Mike?
Thank you, Bill. Bill Redeker reporting live for us this morning from Saudi Arabia. We'll take a break right now and be back with more in just a moment.
This is a News 8 special report. The war in the Mideast.
Well, so far we've been tremendously fortunate, as you just heard. Many Americans at risk and many returning safely.
We might look at some reaction around the world. It has been somewhat varied, as you might expect. First of all, UN Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar defended the massive U.S. air attacks against Iraq, of course, representing the UN position that the U.S. is taking. Javier Pérez de Cuellar said the hostilities are in the framework of the resolutions of the Security Council. The president of Chile said the war has begun and this is painful for humanity. The foreign minister of Argentina said his government will keep 2 ships in the Persian Gulf and try to persuade its Congress to authorize the vessels to fight on the side of the U.S. and its allies. Canada has authorized its troops in the Gulf to carry out sweep and escort missions if necessary in the war against Iraq. There has been no official reaction from Moscow, but troops in the southern part of the Soviet Union have been placed on heightened alert because of the strike and, of course, of their proximity to that region. Now, in Cairo, you might say there's been reaction from Egyptians and from exiled Kuwaitis. The exiled Kuwaitis are reported to have screamed and honked their horns in delight. The Egyptians are reported to be more subdued. Lisa has, of course, been in Egypt numerous times, including recently. And how do they feel there about Saddam Hussein and about the United States?
Well, about the United States, I mean, Egypt is one of our strongest allies in that part of the world, yet there's a feeling among Egyptians and among all Arabs that the U.S. has dealt unevenly with the players in the Middle East, particularly Israel and the Palestinians, over the last few years. The Palestinians within those countries, and there are many, their loyalties are just confused. I talked to one graduate of North Texas State, actually, Palestinian Jordanian, just yesterday, who said, you know, right now, of course, I'm standing behind the Americans. He said, but, you know, if Israel becomes involved, you know, I don't know what I'll do then.
All right. We will rejoin ABC now as our continuous coverage continues.
But first, as we pointed out earlier in the broadcast, we have told you about the various different types of equipment that has gone into battle here, and we've shown you some of the people who have gone as well. We would like to pause for a moment here and reflect upon those people serving our country right now and those they have left behind. So we take you right now to Detroit reporter Dave Gilbert, who is standing by with Carol and Pat Gruber, who have a son, Carl Jr., who is now a U.S. Marine serving overseas. Dave?
Mike, Pat and Carl Gruber obviously tried to prepare themselves for the war. The last few days, especially in the 15th yesterday, they tried to gear themselves up. Their son, Carl Jr., as you mentioned, he's a Marine in the 1st Battalion right on the front lines. He's a recon sniper, and if we do go to a ground force, he will be one of the first ones in. But what they found out at 7 o'clock last night is that you never are emotionally prepared for something like this. They found out that they just couldn't handle it. You thought you were gearing yourself up, and then what happened when you heard the war?
I just went to pieces. I couldn't believe that it really was in there and the bombs were going, and it just really upset me. And I prayed for the boys immediately.
But for days you've been hearing that it looked like we were going for war. You were telling me you thought that you have to get yourself ready for that your son's over there, that he is going to be fighting. And at 7 o'clock last night, you heard about the first bombs going off, and you still weren't ready.
I don't think you're ever prepared for it. I think you just go with it. You have to support the boys. They're over there. They're fighting. And I'm behind them.
Carl, it's been about 9 hours now since the first shot was fired. How are you holding up right now?
I'm holding up pretty good. I'm praying a lot and hoping the best comes out of this, that it'll be real quick and we won't have to use any ground forces, and maybe, you know, be over in 1 or 2 days at the most, hopefully.
Those are your biggest prayers, really, is that since your son's right there on the front lines, he's a sniper, he could go in immediately if we did use a ground force.
Yes, he would go in immediately, and I'm hoping it'll end with the air so he doesn't have to go in, but I'm also hoping that the air can come through this without too many people getting hurt, too.
Now, one of the last letters you received from your son, I understand, he said that he's willing to die for this country. How does it make you feel now when you actually know that could happen?
Well, I've heard him say it many a times. He says, the Marines never retreat. He says, we will die for our country. And it hurts, but it also makes you proud of him, too, because he's proud to be a Marine. And it's something he's always talked about since he's been in the Marines. These Marines are proud.
Like so many other family members, both of you obviously have been on an emotional roller coaster for months now. You were high, then low. When the hostages were released, you were saying you thought that it was not going to be war. Then it looked like war, and now we are in the middle of war. Do you support President Bush's action, Pat? Do you back the war right now, although your son is over there and he's right close to it?
This is a News 8 special report.
Commander-in-Chief.
The war in the Mideast.
Good morning once again. We want to bring you first-hand information on what's happening in the Middle East right now. And, of course, we do have a crew over there in Jordan.
Cindy Kennard is our reporter in Amman, and Cindy is with us now live. Cindy?
Well, first, Lisa, let me tell you that within about 45 minutes here in Amman, the Office of Civil Defense in Jordan is expected to conduct an air raid drill. Jordan citizens found out about that in a broadcast on Jordan television last night before they went to bed. Now, this was, of course, before the U.S.-led air attack on Baghdad. As far as citizens waking up this morning, the first thing they saw was a newspaper headline, which in fact did indicate that war had broken out in the Gulf. But life here is really rather routine, with citizens coming and going to work and going shopping. There is no evidence in this capital city that it has been disrupted by air attacks on its neighbor Iraq. A Western diplomat did warn yesterday that perhaps there would be civil unrest as a result of a U.S.-led attack on Baghdad, but we have seen no evidence of that up to this point. But we must say that a PLO funeral scheduled for today to pass through Amman has been canceled. There had been the thought that that could trigger some anti-American sentiment that is already heightened in the Palestinian community. But as we said, that has been canceled, and that should ease Jordan's growing security concerns. Lisa?
Cindy, this is Quinn Matthews in the newsroom. Has the anti-American sentiment eased up a bit today?
Well, as I said, it will certainly hope to have that PLO funeral march canceled. It had thought that, in fact, Western diplomats, as I said, had said yesterday that they were very concerned that could trigger anti-American sentiment here in Amman. But in fact, that has been canceled, and Jordan security forces were also worried about that prospect. There has been measures taken here at the hotel that's housing American journalists. There was tape put on the window overnight in preparation for any attack that could occur, which is unlikely at this point. We should say that military police also arrived at the hotel shortly after the air raid on Baghdad. And also there are cars that are coming through the hotel area where the American journalists, where all the foreign journalists are, that are being checked consistently. There is also a shelter now in the discotheque of this hotel with beds should the need arise.
Okay, Cindy. And again, it was feared that Amman might become a battlefront should Iraq launch an attack on Israel. And so far, it looks like, you know, that is not going to happen.
Yeah, we have no reports, really, of Iraq launching an attack against anything other than just aircraft over Iraq's airspace. And partly, it's believed that's because the U.S. and its allies have struck at Iraq's missile sites and other installations that it would have used to strike back.
You know, Quinn, one of the reasons that we wanted to break in with Network is to get you the latest on the wire. A couple of things have just come across. Four of the largest oil companies have frozen gas prices after the outbreak of war. Oil prices soared along with the dollar on the Tokyo market this morning. And one final economic note on what this war might cost us: 28 to $86 billion is what this might add to the military budget this year.
And you might be wondering what has happened to Saddam Hussein. Of course, the U.S. has said he himself is not a target. Of course, by presidential order, assassination is prohibited. Saddam Hussein was seen at a TV station and has made an address on the radio, and the latest that we have on that is that he remains defiant as the U.S. and allied bombs continue to rain down on his country. In a speech broadcast on the radio, he vowed to defeat President Bush, calling him, quote, the Satan in the White House, and he reserved his harshest criticism for King Fahd in Saudi Arabia.
And right now, we are going to rejoin Network for the latest that they have.
Quoting Gorbachev right now, and he says the hostilities were provoked, and this is the quote, by the refusal of the leadership of Iraq to carry out the demands of the world community to pull its forces out of Kuwait. Gorbachev made that comment in a pre-recorded television broadcast, the Soviets making it clear that they do hold Iraq accountable for what has happened in the Persian Gulf. We pointed out a little bit earlier as well that Soviet troops along the southern part of the Soviet Union, which has a border, shares a border with Iraq, have now been put on full alert, but we've been told that is simply a precaution because of the hostilities, and nothing more should be read into it than that. Iraq is making some claims now regarding some of the warplanes that have bombed and strafed its territory. Earlier today, we heard from Defense Secretary Dick Cheney that all of the American warplanes involved in the initial strike had apparently returned safely. The British Prime Minister John Major said the same thing when he held a bit of a mini press conference outside of number 10 Downing Street, his official residence in London, about, I guess, an hour and a half to 2 hours ago. But the Iraqis are now claiming that they have shot down 14 allied planes raiding Kuwait and Iraq. The statement was read by the Iraqi military command. It quoted Baghdad radio. It said the planes were downed in dogfights with Iraqi planes or by anti-aircraft fire. Now, in terms of anti-aircraft fire, the only thing we have heard is that, yes, there was anti-aircraft fire. It was spotted and it was frequent. There are reports now, actually confirmed reports from the French defense minister, that 4 French warplanes involved in raids with American warplanes were indeed hit by ground fire, and that they did return safely to base, one of them suffering more serious damage than others. One of the pilots apparently suffering some...
Un mundo de hombres a toda velocidad. Y este hombre pone a Raúl de Molina en un 3-2 con una bailarina impactante. Entérese de todo este martes en Primer Impacto edición nocturna a las 10:09 centro.
Cuando me siento fresca, puedo abrazar.
For local stations, for the local news, we'll be back with our coverage in a moment.
O'clock in the afternoon in Iraq, where no doubt damage is being assessed. However, Western journalists confined to the Al Rashid Hotel report seeing no signs of major damage in the center of the city. It is clear Hussein is alive and maybe well. He's broadcasting, vowing to crush the satanic intentions of the White House. He said on radio, the great showdown has begun. We have some interviews with some U.S. servicemen who were part of the ground crew for the U.S. jets which launched the attacks on Iraq and Kuwait. Here are some of their thoughts.
We just come on duty, and all of a sudden we had a pilot, and boom, we was gone. I mean, there was no notice situation. No drills, no nothing.
I'm kind of jittery. There's still the chemical question in my mind. Apparently, the news said that he did fire some this morning, but they fell short of their targets. That was a little bit to help out my worries, but still there's a worry there.
Well, I wish that Iraq would, you know, Mr. Hussein would realize that he doesn't have a chance here, and that he would just say, hey, we'll call quits. I'll leave. You guys can, you know, take off.
U.S. servicemen in Saudi Arabia. Jean Meserve is at the State Department. Jean, is there anything new on the foreign front?
An address to the Soviet people. It was a pre-recorded television address. In it, he blamed the hostilities on Saddam Hussein, saying that they were caused by the refusal of the leadership of Iraq to carry out the demands of the world community to pull its forces out of Kuwait. Not unexpected comments from the Soviet president. The Soviets were early on recruited to be part of the coalition against Iraq, and they have been steadfast in their support. We know that the new foreign minister, Bashmertnik, was one of the people who Secretary of State Baker talked to yesterday. Carol?
Jean, thank you. We're going to go now to Bill Greenwood. Bill, there's been some difficulty with the Soviet Union and what's been happening in Lithuania. How is Bush likely to respond to Soviet support from Gorbachev?
Well, clearly he has worked very admirably to win that support. For the first time since World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union are allied on a major international conflict, in a conflict. But it also puts the president on a diplomatic tightrope, as you can well understand, Carol. He is in the position of condemning the Soviet Union for the attacks in Lithuania while trying to hold them in line on our side, if you will, on the coalition side in the Persian Gulf. It's a tricky little act for the president, but he's doing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill Greenwood at the White House. We'll have more ABC News coverage of the Gulf War in a moment.
This is a News 8 special report. The war in the Mideast.
And good morning again. Lisa McCree here in the Channel 8 newsroom with Quinn Matthews, continuing our coverage. And again, just a reminder, if the coverage, if you feel like it's disjointed, that we keep popping up. ABC has chosen to run commercials during their coverage, and we feel like we would rather go to local programming and give you what we know here. A quick reminder, we have a telephone number for you, 988-7888, particularly for people who have family or friends or have specific concerns. We have staff manning the phone since this crisis began, and I would be happy to answer questions. They have wire services available to them, and we'll be happy to make phone calls if necessary to try to help you out and put your mind at ease. The latest that we have, again, you've been hearing all night long, the first attack on hundreds of Iraqi military targets was hugely successful. The second wave of attacks has begun. The Iraqis seemingly haven't answered with any military force of any significance. There are reports from Kuwait Radio and from Egypt's news agency that there's some ground fighting along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. As yet, those reports are unconfirmed. A couple of other things that we just got from ABC. 4 French planes apparently were hit, but did return to their base safely. Iraqi radio is reporting that 14 Allied planes were in fact hit in dogfights or by ground fire. Quinn?
This news from Baghdad, from some of the reporters who are in Baghdad, most of the damage there apparently has been done on the outskirts of the city. That is according to American TV network reporters in Baghdad. CNN reporter Peter Arnett said there appeared to be some direct hits on some buildings, and he said he saw 3 surface-to-air missiles launched, but he did not see them hit a target. We will have continuous coverage through the morning, and so stay tuned to Channel 8. We'll go back to network right now.
Difficult to pin down. It comes from a variety of sources. We will tell you what we're hearing, and we will qualify it as best we can. To tell you what we know, we do know for a fact that a second wave of attacks were launched several hours ago on Iraqi targets by the U.S. and allied forces. The combined resources, the warplanes of the United States, Great Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, and earlier in the day, Kuwaiti fighter jets as well, bombing and rocketing several positions, a variety of strategic positions in Iraq. There have been a number of direct hits, we're told, on military installations and on targets of strategic importance, we're told. Earlier in the day, we were told by American forces and by the British Prime Minister as well that casualties were virtually nil, non-existent, that the planes in the first raid, which began dinner time last night and lasted for about 3 hours, all returned safely. We are now hearing a variety of reports that tend to contradict that, and we're not sure whether these are just reports that tend to be not credible in nature or whether they involve later action that we simply can't confirm. The Iraqis are claiming that they have shot down 14 Allied planes over Iraq and Kuwait today. They say they were shot down either by anti-aircraft fire or by dogfights. As far as we know, however, up until this point, we have not been told about any Iraqi warplanes rising to meet the Allied warplanes. We're now receiving reports, so and once again we emphasize these are unconfirmed reports as far as we know, from Iranian television telling us, among other things, that a U.S. F-15 fighter bomber crashed into the Gulf waters this morning, and the pilot parachuted into the Gulf. That is coming from Iranian television, no confirmation there. And Iranian television is also reporting now that the Iraqis fired Scud-B, 4 Scud-B missiles at Bahrain, and also fired missiles at Saudi Arabia's Khafji oil refinery and at another refinery in the area as well. We're going to go to Steve Shepard at the Pentagon right now. Steve, are you hearing anything about these claims and reports?
We are not right now, Mike, and I would not put much credibility in any of them at this time. You know, the old saying, the truth is the first casualty of war, is something that we all have to keep in mind. It's a very confused situation over there on the ground. At the present time, the engagement began 7 o'clock Eastern time last night. That's 10 hours ago. There have obviously been massive airstrikes, but from all sorts of sources in that area, many of them probably not very reliable. We're going to hear all sorts of rumor. We're going to see rumor printed as fact. It's all going to be quite confusing until a little later this morning when the Pentagon comes out and discusses its after-action report, its first analysis with daylight photographs, satellite reconnaissance, that kind of thing, of just what kind of activity took place over Baghdad and other areas of Iraq and Kuwait last night, and how effective U.S. bombing raids were. The preliminary reports from Secretary of Defense Cheney and Chief of Staff Colin Powell were quite optimistic regarding U.S. casualties. The fact was that earlier this evening we had heard of no U.S. planes being shot down, and ABC correspondents in Saudi Arabia, talking with men coming back from those missions, are asking them how it went, and they almost all say, well, my men got back. So I think that any reports of U.S. planes being downed now have to be taken with a very large grain of salt. which is not to say it couldn't happen or that it won't happen. But we have no confirmed reports at this time.
It would be extraordinary if they were all to get back, callous as it may sound. I think the Pentagon estimates that in an average combat situation, you lose somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4% of your planes. One can only hope that is not true, of course.
Well, Mike, even in peacetime, operating off a naval aircraft carrier or doing low-level attacks with Air Force planes in the deserts in Utah, practice runs, is dangerous. These are high-performance airplanes. There are hundreds of them in the sky at any given moment. They're operating at night over rough terrain in an area that American pilots have gotten more familiar with, but it's not like operating at home. So just that alone has its hazards, and I would be surprised if some planes weren't lost just due to accident, to mistake, to equipment breakdown sometime during this conflict. But we have no reports now that Iraqi anti-aircraft fire or anti-aircraft missiles have been very effective. In fact, it seems from the reports that the Iraqis were caught relatively flat-footed. It is clear that Baghdad was lit last night for well over an hour after the raids began. We got that from Gary Shepard, one of our correspondents in Baghdad. So despite having months to prepare for this conflict, they don't appear to have taken the first blows too effectively.
Thank you, Steve. ABC's Steve Shepard at the Pentagon. As Admiral Crowell, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told us last night, and as Steve pointed out, first reports are often wrong, and too much stock should not be placed in them. One of the key players in the world scene in recent years, and certainly the odd man out to a certain extent in this situation, is Mikhail Gorbachev, who is preoccupied in various ways with his own domestic problems in the Soviet Union. It turns out that Gorbachev has now gone on record blaming Saddam Hussein for the trouble, for the war now in the Persian Gulf. Gorbachev did release a statement this morning in which he said that he had been informed about an hour before the attack occurred by Secretary of State Baker that he tried to contact the president, and here is more of what Mr. Gorbachev had to say.
Such a tragic turn was provoked by the fact that Iraq did not want to take its troops out of Kuwait.
Gorbachev said that he did try to also contact Saddam Hussein to give a last-ditch appeal for him to try to avert war and pull his forces out of Kuwait. The indication is that Mr. Gorbachev did not get through. The situation certainly has had a major impact on the state of Israel, which has been standing by rather nervously, watching and waiting to see if Saddam Hussein would make good on his threat to attack Israel if he were attacked by the Allied forces. Bill Siemens is covering the situation in Jerusalem.
When Israel radio broadcast the news that the missile bases were believed to have been destroyed, they would have been dancing in the streets if the Israelis hadn't been told to stay at home near their gas masks and anti-gas shelter rooms, just in case Saddam Hussein still might launch a surprise attack. Civil defense asked all non-essential workers to stay off the streets until it's absolutely sure there is no further threat. Thus, this morning, there was hardly any traffic other than public transportation and police and emergency vehicles. A national emergency still has not been declared. It's more of a national caution alert. The U.S. Embassy also told Americans to stay at home just in case. The estimate here is that the next 24 hours will be critical. Officials are following developments in a Foreign Ministry emergency situation room.
We have only praise for the American and Allied forces, for what they have done, for the good result, and we hope that each and every one will return home safely.
In East Jerusalem, Palestinian Arabs gathered at the U.S. consulate seeking refuge after rumors spread that they might be deported by the Israelis.
Everybody coming here are very afraid. They're coming here, they're afraid to be transferred to Jordan or to anywhere.
And in the West Bank and Gaza, a total curfew has been imposed to prevent violent demonstrations supporting Saddam Hussein. And more on that Palestinian situation in the Arab community of Atur, right here on the edge of Jerusalem. It has been placed under curfew after violent demonstrations that were put down by Israeli forces using rubber bullets and tear gas. And also under curfew here in the Jerusalem area are the Silwan and Shofat Palestinian refugee camps. Mike?
Bill, what about the military status of Israel in terms of this perceived threat? What's the state of alert there?
A national emergency has not been called. National mobilization has not been called. The Air Force is on the top alert and continues to be so. Special units have been quietly called, and the whole intent is to keep as much a low profile as possible.
Tell us a little bit about the reaction of the top Israeli officials to all this.
The spokesman for the Israeli government said this morning that the opinion in the government is very, very qualified and very, very careful, but they do see a little ray from that light at the end of the tunnel. He said they feel that the danger has receded a bit, but the danger is still there, and the Israeli public is being asked to stay at home, stay close to those gas masks.
What about further down the line? They must try to long-range scope things out, and they obviously have been privy to all the speculation that regardless of the outcome, Israel will be perhaps dragged kicking and screaming into some sort of international peace conference. Is that something that, that troubles them?
Very deeply, and Prime Minister Shamir has repeatedly said it's a non-starter as far as the Israelis are concerned. No participation in an international conference, but he's willing to go into unilateral peace negotiations with each of the Arab countries.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Siemens reporting live for us this morning from Jerusalem. We will take a break and be back with more on the Gulf War in a moment.
And good morning again. I'm Lisa McCree here with Quinn Matthews in our continuing coverage, filling these commercial holes with a little more information. This might be a good time to kind of look back and yesterday, when it was still Operation Desert Shield, before it came Operation Desert Storm, President Bush, of course, had said over and over again he wanted this to be a decisive battle, a decisive victory. They wanted to go in and liberate Kuwait by attacking some key military targets in Iraq. Most of those, we can look at the map, Cardi, most of those are along the center here. Most of the population centers up and down the river valley. But there are also some airfields to the south and over in this area as well. Well, apparently they've done that, eliminating, we think, most of the threat to Israel. The threat was that there would be something fired from Iraq that would engage Israel, which would, of course, further confuse the loyalties of the other Arabs involved in the conflict. That has not happened, and as the second wave of attack continues, it looks very good for the U.S. forces.
There has been no report at all that Iraq has struck back with anything other than anti-aircraft fire. The missiles, the Scud missiles that it was feared would be fired by Iraq and would be aimed not only at Saudi Arabia but at Israel simply have not been fired, or at least there's no evidence of that. On that second wave, the United States and its allies, which were, of course, the exiled Kuwaiti troops and Britain, were joined by French forces, and France says it joined the second wave of attacks and that all 12 of its attack jets did return to Saudi Arabia, although 4 were damaged by fire. Also, forces from the Netherlands have now been placed under U.S. command. There is a reaction from Iran's president. Iran, of course, was at war with Iraq for some time, but they seem to have patched up some differences in recent times. Iran's president expressed regrets about the outbreak of war and said Iran is carefully watching developments. The PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, very closely allied with Saddam Hussein, has called on Arab leaders to oppose what it called the American-European Zionist Alliance that at least seems to be successful at this time this morning.
And that's it for us right now. Back to ABC.
Night here on the East Coast, we've been peppering you with all sorts of numbers and letters and acronyms for various different types of weapon systems, some of which we understand a little, some of which we really don't understand at all. So we're going to join Henry Dodds right now in London. He is from Jane's Intelligence Weekly, one of the Jane's Intelligence Review, I should say, one of the most authoritative sources on armaments in the world. Mr. Dodds, what have we seen thus far in the way of technology being employed here? What really has either surprised or impressed you the most?
Well, the thing that has impressed me the most is both the American Air Force and the British Royal Air Force saying that all their planes came back from their sorties. And if that's true, and there's no reason to disbelieve it, that is an extraordinary credit, not just to the pilots, but to the machines themselves, that they were able to operate over those sorts of distances and still come home after completing their missions.
What do you attribute that to?
I attribute it to extremely high maintenance standards out in the desert and an extremely good build standard in the first place. A lot of excellent aircraft being flown out there.
Not any deficiency on the Iraqis' part?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I was going to say it was proficiency on the Allies' part and not any deficiency on the Iraqis' part?
I think what we saw on the part of the Allied air attack was a whole coordinated effort to make sure that the Iraqis couldn't bring their anti-aircraft missiles to bear. They couldn't get their aircraft off the ground. So it's part of a combined operation. It looks as if it was a superbly planned operation.
As near as we can tell, what role did stealth technology play in the surprise element here?
There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that any of the stealth aircraft were actually deployed. We've got absolutely no information on that. One can speculate that they could have been used against key targets, heavily defended targets, but so far there's no information on that at all.
And what about the cruise missiles, specifically the Tomahawk cruise, which really had never been tested under combat conditions before?
Well, there were varying reports as to the number of cruise missiles actually fired. They're an extremely efficient way of taking out high-value targets, but at a price of over $1 million each, you want to make sure that you're going to fire it at a target that's really worth the effort.
Now, the big question, of course, has been the Iraqi offensive capability, and there's been an awful lot of concern about the chemical weapons that could allegedly be mounted on the top of the Scud missiles. We had various reports throughout the night that Scuds either had or had not been fired. What can you tell us about these missiles, and if they didn't get them off, why not?
Well, the indications are that the Iraqis don't actually seem to have got any Scud missiles off the ground. And it would seem that the reason for this is that the missile sites were hit before the missiles could actually be prepared for launch. Now, the Scud missiles are deployed on permanent sites, but the launchers themselves are mobile. So while the sites may have been destroyed, it's possible that one or two launchers may have survived and may be being prepared for a launch later on today or at some later stage in the war.
Is it axiomatic that it'll be a lot tougher to take them out during daylight?
It really doesn't matter whether it's daylight or whether it's dark. The main thing is to find them and to be sure that by the time your strike aircraft get there, they're still there. Because they're a mobile launcher, they can be fairly easily moved around.
Did satellite intelligence really play a major part in pinpointing targets here?
Yes, I think there will have been a major intelligence effort to pinpoint all the key targets using not just satellite technology, but also electronic listening stations to listen into Iraqi radio broadcasts to really pinpoint where the key targets were. And the fact that so many key targets seem to have been hit is a major credit to the intelligence analysis and the planning that went in before the operation was launched.
Now, one of the major ways of trying to incapacitate your adversary is to make it impossible for him to get his warplanes up. And I understand that the British forces have a specialized sort of bomb which tends to put runways out of business for quite a while.
That's right, and a large number of RAF Tornadoes were being flown, carrying a weapon known as the JP-233. Now, this is the first time this weapon's ever been used in anger. It's an extremely efficient way of closing runways. The aircraft has to fly over the runway. From a container beneath the aircraft, you have a number of mines, a number of bomblets coming down onto the runway. The runway is cratered immediately. There are delayed action charges, which means that 3 or 4 minutes after the attack, you get further explosions going off. There's landmines to prevent people going in to clear up the damage afterwards. It's an extremely efficient way of closing runways and a very nasty weapon to try and clear up afterwards.
We've been told that this is the most massive airstrike in the history of warfare. How, with that many warplanes up there, even if you don't have an adversary that you know of up there, how do you keep from shooting each other down?
You have to have extremely good air traffic control. You have to have aircraft coming in along known flight paths and leaving along different flight paths. Not only do you have to prevent any aerial collisions, but you also have to make sure that your own air defense system knows when the aircraft are going out and when the aircraft are coming back. And it's a tremendous coordinating job, but if you get it right, then we get the sort of results that we seem to have had with the first and second waves.
Well, Mr. Dodds, we appreciate your making yourself available and your expertise available to us on this very important day. Henry Dodds from our London Bureau. He's from Jane's Intelligence Review. We will take a break right now, and our coverage will continue in a moment.
Here we go. Welcome back to the Channel 8 newsroom. Our continuous coverage of the war continues. We want to tell you something about Texas troops involved. And so far, we don't know if any ground troops are engaged in any kind of action. The action has all been from the air so far. Now, about 23,000 troops have been deployed to Saudi Arabia from Fort Hood in central Texas. That is, of course, the nation's largest Army base. We have reaction from a number of Texas leaders. Senator Lloyd Bentsen says, "We're at war. We must stand by our troops and support them in every way possible." Senator Phil Gramm says the president spent 5 months walking the extra mile for peace. Saddam Hussein never responded to any of our efforts. Governor Ann Richards said it is a very sad time. She said, "My hope is that it will be completed quickly so our men and women can come back home safely." And Gracie Moody of Houston, whose son Alfred Rodriguez, 20 years old, is an Army tank driver in Saudi Arabia, says, "I just wish I knew where he was and what he's doing. I've been saying prayers like crazy." Those reactions from Texans.
Well, on the financial note, in Tokyo, the market opened just moments after the war began. And in the opening moments of the Tokyo Stock Exchange, everything took off. Stocks, bonds, the U.S. dollar up against the yen, prices of oil, prices of gold, all shot up in reaction. But as the minutes wore on into hours, things settled back down, and people started dumping the dollar. The dollar is often bought as a safe haven. In the time of crisis, it was snapped up, but then again dumped. It opened trading at 137.95 from Wednesday's finish. We'll have more on business news and how the war has affected the price of oil a little bit later when the New York markets open in a few hours.
And we rejoin network at this time. We'll be monitoring ABC and CNN.
Continuing our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf for you right now, we are still monitoring the situation as closely as we can. Obviously, it's tough to get information directly back from the battlefield, which thus far as we know, has been simply in the skies over Iraq and part of the day over Kuwait as well. What we're being told by officials in the U.S. and in the British government is that the warplanes have done considerable damage to targets, especially targets around Baghdad, we're told. We were told by the British Prime Minister there have been no British casualties, that all the British warplanes have returned. We've heard the same thing from American officials as well. French warplanes involved in attacks have reported that 4 of their planes were hit by ground fire, but they all returned safely, although 1 pilot may have been injured. And that the raids now, this is the second raid, which started earlier this morning, and as far as we know, it continues part of the massive attack that had been promised by the Bush administration. And thus far, there have been conflicting claims from Iraqi officials contending that they have shot down more than a dozen Allied warplanes, either through anti-aircraft fire or through dogfights. But as far as the Allied sources are concerned, we don't know of any Iraqi planes rising to meet the Allied fighters in any dogfights at all, nor do we know of any Allied planes that have been shot down as a result of ground fire. This fighting has had a major impact already on the variety of world markets. Ken Pruitt is standing by right now to update that story for us. Ken, good morning.
Mike, good morning. The American financial markets open in just over 4 hours, 9:30 Eastern Time, after foreign markets overnight saw higher stocks and cheaper oil. The Tokyo Stock Exchange soared more than 1,000 points to 23,446, the 10th biggest increase on record. The London market is now open. It's higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 18 points in Wednesday's trading, which ended before the attack. Market analysts say indications of a short war should push the stock market higher. Now, for one thing, this was the best advertised war in history, and everybody who was going to sell had already done so. For another, institutional investors, pension funds, mutual funds, have huge reserves of cash they're waiting to put to work. And the thinking on Wall Street is a short war would push oil prices down. That would have the effect of putting more money into the pockets of consumers, money they could spend and perhaps put an end to the recession. Oil prices surged on first reports of the attack, moving to $40 a barrel in private cash trading in Houston and New Orleans. But then prices moved lower. Oil's in good supply right now at refineries and on seagoing tankers. In addition, President Bush has announced the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, about 590 million barrels stored in salt caverns in Texas and Louisiana, will be open to stabilize the market. And some of the nation's major oil companies, including Mobil, Chevron, Atlantic Richfield, Amoco, Conoco, Shell, and others, have announced they will freeze the wholesale price of gasoline and other oil products.
Mike, we heard so many dire predictions while this was still in the crisis stage about what could happen, what might happen, what would happen. Have any of those predictions actually been borne out now, or is this a volatile situation where you really can't come down on one side or the other?
What Wall Street's really betting on is a short war. That's what they've always bet on. And one factor you can't ignore is, by some measures, institutional cash is at the highest level in almost 20 years. These pension funds get cash from the sponsoring company every quarter. There have been 2 quarters when the market's been going down, the cash has been coming in, dividend and interest income has been coming in, and those guys are paid to buy stocks. They're not paid to put that money in T-bills.
What about businesses that manufacture products? Are there some that are guaranteed to do well as a result of conflict?
Well, ones that maybe are, if, again, it's a short conflict, are going to be able to pay less for oil. That would mean airlines, particularly. Oil is a major cost for airlines.
What, though, is the likelihood of any, if it's a long-term war? Does anybody benefit there?
Well, then things could get pretty bad. The street, as I said, is expecting a short war. So is just about everybody else. A long war would mean higher oil prices, could mean a worse recession, and big trouble on Wall Street and other places.
Okay, Ken, thank you very much. Ken Pruitt, covering the ramifications that the war has had on the business markets and the business scene around the world this morning. There have been many demonstrations in cities prior to the outbreak of hostilities, and they have also been subsequent to the war itself. There was some trouble at one of them this morning that happened in New York City. At least 7 demonstrators were hurt as they marched on a roadway across the Brooklyn Bridge. They were apparently hit by a speeding car. 2 of those protesters are now in the hospital, said to be in critical condition. There were about 500 people involved in this march in New York City. We'll take a break right now for local stations for their news update. We'll be back with our coverage in just a moment.
This is a News 8 special report. The war in the Mideast.
Good morning again. Quinn Matthews here with Lisa McCree. Most of what we've heard has to do with the raids from the air, the 2 massive airstrikes against military targets in Iraq. There are a lot of ground forces, though, waiting for action. There are 650,000 U.S.-led forces on the ground. Of course, some of those are from other countries, such as France, Britain, and the Netherlands, and as well as Kuwait. That U.S.-led ground force is poised to attack. Now, Kuwait radio is reporting Allied ground forces began moving toward the occupied emirate following the aerial assault, but that report has not been confirmed. Soviet President Gorbachev has reacted to the outbreak of war. He says he made a final pitch for peace and urged President Bush to call Saddam Hussein 1 hour before the Gulf attack was launched. In a nationally televised address in the Soviet Union, Gorbachev said Secretary of State Baker phoned him early Thursday morning to tell him the attack was imminent. And that's when Gorbachev said he made his proposal to the president. Gorbachev says he deeply regrets that a military clash was unavoidable, but he says the Soviets did everything they could to resolve the crisis peacefully. Lisa?
You know, Quinn, we really tried to put our hand on the pulse of our area to find out what people felt after the outbreak of war all over the city. Our reporters went out to talk to people, and though many people had hoped for peace to the very last moment, once war broke out, the consensus was generally, with most people we spoke with, that once it started, they just hoped it was over with quickly, decisive, and that Saddam Hussein was out once and for all. However, there are people who are still opposed to the war, want peace at any price. Many of those people staged a protest last night in downtown Dallas. In fact, they chose the exact hour to start their protest as the U.S. chose to start the war. Channel 8's Matt Quinn delivered the unwelcome news of war to those protesters and watched what looked like a scene from history.
All we are saying is give peace a chance.
By mid-evening, the reflecting pool at Dallas City Hall Plaza looked and sounded like a scene from the 60s.
All we are saying.
This was the bittersweet ending of a peace rally which had begun earlier in the day. At about the same time, the war began. The peace protesters found out about it the same way most people did, on television.
It started?
It has started, yeah. ABC is reporting that it has started.
What's this? Oh, my God.
By mid-evening, the crowd on City Hall Plaza had grown to more than 150, and opposition to the new war was growing, too.
We need to be back here every night, every night, every night. We need to be back here. If there's going to be war in the Gulf, that must not be peace in America. Let's fill the jails.
I am very sad, but I am proud of you. At this age of 80, I want to be with you on every occasion you meet, you pray in the church. I'll be with you like a brother, like an admirer.
Imagine all the people
Many of the faces here were too young to have lived this scene the first time, nearly a quarter-century ago. But they hope to raise the same old questions. Matt Quinn, Channel 8 News.
Well, we are back again. 23,000 troops have been deployed to Saudi Arabia from Fort Hood. Two-thirds of them are connected to 2 tank divisions that are among the lead of the U.S. ground forces. We have some unconfirmed reports from Kuwait Radio and from Egypt's news agency that some ground fighting has started, but we still have no confirmation. That, of course, is the big fear. If there is an air attack, especially with the night air attack as was launched overnight, the U.S. stands a wonderful chance of knocking out the key military targets with very, very few casualties. In fact, we have no reports of casualties at this time. Of course, the fear is the ground attack. The forces are so dug in Kuwait, the cost could be very high in terms of human lives.
Defense Secretary Cheney was asked about on the subject of casualties. He said he would not discuss them while the attack, which of course has been codenamed Operation Desert Storm, was in progress. Now, also about targets. You know, the United States has not said exactly which targets it has hit in Iraq and Kuwait in the first assault. However, there are some television correspondents and other reporters in Baghdad, and they've reported heavy anti-aircraft fire and explosions in the outskirts of Baghdad. But of course, as we've been reporting, Iraq is apparently not struck back other than with anti-aircraft fire.
Time for us to go back to ABC News for the latest coverage that they have.
We'll see you later.
Hello, I'm Mike Schneider. Once again, our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf continues as we discuss the latest events unfolding in Iraq. It appears that the second wave of fighter bombers to hit that country is inflicting some very serious damage. This is the second of 2 massive airstrikes into that country, the first one occurring after dark last night, which hit very hard in areas in and around Baghdad. This morning, we're told that the second strike on the capital of Saddam Hussein's country scored direct hits on the Iraq Defense Ministry and also on the post office headquarters. That comes from the BBC. We're also being told of a variety of other serious strikes in that country. And according to U.S. officials and to British officials, thus far, all of the planes that they have sent out have returned safely. The ones that have returned to base, that is, at this point, it appears that some are still in the process of actually engaging in conflict. You can see there's been a wide variety of warplanes that have been involved in this assault this morning. Perhaps the preeminent plane thus far as we know, have been the F-15s, a warplane designed essentially as a fighter back in the mid-70s. What you're looking at now is an F-4. That plane, with the parachute out its back a second ago, was the mainstay of the U.S. Armed Forces during Vietnam and has been modified for another role, a very important role in this conflict as well. You can see a cluster of the buildings there on the west side of the Tigris River, which is where many of the strategic sites that have been bombed are apparently located. The Defense Ministry to the east of the river is above that, but as we have been told by the BBC, it has been struck. Pilots who have returned have told us a variety of stories about the nature of their assault and the fascinating, disturbing, almost beautiful sight they witnessed in their minds as they saw the destruction beneath them. Let's listen.
We flew into Iraq, and we did escort. We escorted a multinational force and had the ability to go in there. I can't get into numbers of different type of aircraft or what targets were, anything like that. But we went in with a group of guys, and we got everybody out, and that was the most important thing to us.
We launched out, and we were all pumped right from the beginning. We had a lot of good adrenaline going, and we knew they were going for a reason. We weren't just a regular launch. We knew that they were going in there to get Iraq.
It looks a lot like, you know, lights, flickering lights, like Christmas lights or something like that when the AAA's coming up. And then shortly after that, it looks like some big bomb fireworks or something like that going off. It was an awesome display. It truly was.
Stand there, you sit there, and you watch this stuff come up, and at some point you become comfortable almost with what you're doing because you're in your cockpit, and then you realize that this isn't the time to become comfortable with what you're doing because you've got stuff being aimed at you. And it kind of jogs you back into reality, and you go, that is aimed for me. I need to be looking out a little bit better. So it kind of brings you back into reality real quick.
They've been in reality for the better part of a day now. Fighter pilots, bomber pilots from the Air Force, the Navy, not to mention from the various armed forces of Great Britain, France, and also Saudi Arabia, and free Kuwait as well. We're going to go right now over to the White House and also check in with the State Department as well. Bill Greenwood, our White House correspondent, has been monitoring the situation there. Bill, has the White House had anything to say about the relative success that's been reported thus far on the mission?
Only what we heard last night, Mike, that the initial reports were encouraging. The president was following the situation. He was pleased with the early reports that he got. The president's senior staff is not here yet. We expect them within about a half an hour. About 15 minutes ago, the lights went on in the president's living area of the White House, so we can assume that he is now up. If he follows habit, he'll have breakfast. The kitchen lights went on an hour ago. Then I would not be at all surprised if he were to call the Situation Room, which is the crisis command center here in the White House, to get an update, a first morning reading on what actually occurred during that very brief sleeping period. The president had a short night of it. As you know, he went to bed quite late. He spent the evening with an invited guest. The Reverend Billy Graham is here at the White House. They talked about the magnitude of the events that the president unleashed during the night. 2 hours from now, the Secretaries of State and Defense are scheduled to arrive at the White House. They'll meet with the senior staff members and then brief the president. He has a regular national security briefing scheduled for 8 o'clock, but I would not at all be surprised if that is moved up a bit.
Bill, what about the president's day? Is he going to try to stick to some sort of semblance of normalcy when it comes to a schedule, or is it just basically write it off and concentrate on the matter at hand?
I would think that today will be fully involved in the activities in the Persian Gulf. He has a luncheon scheduled with the vice president. That's a weekly event. That will continue. But there's a certain amount of protocol in a situation like this, Mike. He will clearly call the joint congressional leaders to give them a personal assessment of what has happened overnight. He will call the allies in Europe and talk to them. And that will take several hours, I would think.
All right, Bill, stand by if you would, please. We're going to switch over to Gene Meserve at the State Department right now. Gene, we've been hearing words of defiance from Saddam Hussein thus far this morning. If the reports about his surfacing at a TV center in Baghdad and a radio station are to be believed. But what would the administration do if Saddam suddenly took to the airwaves and said, I give up?
They'd listen. We've been asking for several days what happens after that deadline on the 15th. Would the U.S. still be open to conversations with Saddam Hussein? And they have made it perfectly clear here that, yes, they are willing to listen to him if he has a serious initiative to propose. All along, he has been the intransigent party. What they want to see from him is either a withdrawal from Kuwait or assurances that he will get out. If he were to say now that he would do that, I am sure the State Department would listen.
What about the attitude of the Bush administration to the way the allies have performed thus far? Any reaction to that?
There hasn't been anything official, but I'm sure that they are satisfied thus far. We've heard strong statements of support from President Gorbachev, from England, from France. I'm sure all of that is what was expected. After all, they spent months and months putting this coalition together, and just yesterday, the Secretary of State spent a lot of time on the phone trying to cement things, notify people what was going on to make sure that everybody stayed in line.
All right, Gene Meserve at State and Bill Greenwood at the White House, thanks to both of you. Stay with us right now, if you would. We're going to take a break right now. We'll come back in a couple of moments. We will have more on what Mikhail Gorbachev had to say about today's attack in the Gulf.
And good morning again. I'm Lisa McCree here with Quinn Matthews and our continuing coverage of the Gulf crisis.
We want to just update you on what is happening in case you're an early riser this morning. First of all, U.S. and allies have pounded Iraq with 2 waves of airstrikes to try to break Saddam Hussein's military might and drive him from Kuwait. The first strike was before dawn, Iraq time. The second one about 7 hours later. We believe it is still underway. Saddam Hussein apparently has survived the night of fire that rained down on his capital. He has made a radio broadcast. We don't know when that was taped, if it was taped. He still appears defiant. Apparently no Iraqi missiles have hit any targets. Apparently all the damage has been done to Iraq. They have fired at American and Allied planes, but that is all.
Well, we have one report from Baghdad Radio. Of course, it's still unconfirmed, but Baghdad Radio says that 14 Allied planes have, in fact, been shot down. That report is still unconfirmed, and apparently all of the Allied planes that have taken off with their targets and are scheduled to be back on base are back, in fact, on their bases. The military communique says that Iraq's elite Republican Guard in Baghdad shot down 3 of those planes, and the other 11 were brought down by Iraqi air defenses. But again, that is a very, very sketchy report. Other reports from radio overseas in Kuwait and in Egypt say that there are some there's fighting going on the ground at the Kuwaiti-Saudi border, and again, that is unconfirmed. A little footnote here about the Texas contribution to Operation Desert Shield. Troops from Fort Bliss and from Fort Hood number about 40,000 now in the Persian Gulf. Mostly tank forces from Fort Hood and Fort Bliss. Fort Hood's 1st Cavalry Division, augmented by a brigade of the 2nd Armored Division, was the most heavily armed combat ground unit to arrive in Saudi Arabia back in September, and is expected to be among those in the front lines. Quinn?
And we want to point out also this is not just a U.S. attack. It is a U.S.-led attack, but also British, Saudi, and Kuwaiti fighter bombers were involved at first. In the second wave, the French joined in, and now Dutch troops have been placed under the American command. We will now return to network, but stay tuned to Channel 8 because we'll keep updating you through the morning.
What would be the response of President Gorbachev? Well, we have now gotten a response from Mikhail Gorbachev, and ABC correspondent Rick Enderford has it from our Moscow bureau. Rick?
Mike, Mikhail Gorbachev spoke a little over 1 hour ago. It was a very short speech. It was on national television. It was only 4 minutes long. His remarks clearly placed the blame for this crisis on the shoulders of Saddam Hussein.
Such a tragic turn was provoked by the fact that Iraq did not want to take its troops out of Kuwait.
Mike, also, Mr. Gorbachev said that he had received word of the attack about 1 hour before it took place. He got that word from Secretary of State Baker. He restated his hope that diplomacy could have resolved this crisis short of war. He said that he had recently talked to President Bush about additional steps that could be taken, that he had made contact with Saddam Hussein, urging him to step back from the brink. But he said we were unsuccessful, and he closed this short speech by saying, now we will be trying every measure possible to restore peace. And indeed, the Soviets may be in a good position to do that. They still have a diplomatic presence in Baghdad. They are not going to bring out all of their people. And of course, the Soviets have said they are not going to become involved in this militarily. So it is possible that the Soviets could play a very useful role if Saddam Hussein has decided that he has had enough of this.
Isn't it true, though, Rick, that the Iraqis are downright outraged that the Soviets were not there to back them up? They've expressed that rather vividly at times. Do the Soviets really think they can patch things over that quickly?
Well, I don't think it's a question of patching things over quickly, but it is true that the Soviets and the Iraqis continue to talk, and I think that that is a channel that probably can be used as this unfolds.
Well, I understand Barbara Walters had an interview with Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, and perhaps Mr. Gorbachev's arch nemesis of these days. What did Mr. Yeltsin have to say?
Well, on this issue, Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Yeltsin are in agreement. Mr. Yeltsin said that in his view, Russia should not be involved in this crisis, that it was not something that he would recommend becoming involved in. And that's something that Mr. Gorbachev has also said. It's very clear, by the way, that the reason, one very big reason that both sides want to stay out of this, both Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Yeltsin, is because of Afghanistan and the wounds that are still being healed from that experience. And also, this country has so many domestic problems. Getting involved in any international action would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that the Soviet Union does have a population, I believe, somewhere in excess of 70 million Muslims within its borders. Right. Their influence cannot be underestimated, I would presume.
No, that's right. They do have to take what is called the Muslim factor into account. That is another reason why they do not want to be involved.
Rick, we heard reports earlier today that the Soviets placed their military on the southern tier of the country on a high state of alert. What does that mean?
It's simply a precautionary measure. It was ordered by the head of the Soviet military staff, General Moiseev. We don't read anything in that beyond the fact that the Soviet border and the Iraqi border are close, and they simply want to be prepared if something happens there. And of course, war has very unpredictable consequences at times, so we think that it's simply a cautionary move on the part of the Soviet military.
All right, Rick. ABC's Rick Endefer reporting for us this morning from Moscow. We showed you a little while ago John Major, the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, talking to reporters, responding to the reports that the mission thus far has gone very well. We now also have a reaction from Mr. Major's predecessor, Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Britain. Here it is.
Warning.
In a way, I'm relieved that it started and the uncertainty is over. I know that that means a great deal of worry for the families of the armed forces, but we know full well that our armed forces have to stand up for freedom and justice and to fight against tyranny.
Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Britain. We've just established telephone communications now with ABC correspondent Gary Shepard in Baghdad. Gary?
Good afternoon. It is now approximately 1:45 in the afternoon here in Baghdad. We have had sporadic anti-aircraft fire during the day following last night's 3-hour barrage. The Allied air attack began at 20 minutes before 3 o'clock in the morning. Skies over Baghdad literally came alive with barrage after barrage of anti-aircraft fire. Hundreds of thousands of rounds of red tracers racing up from the ground, attempting to hit the invading bombers, but apparently failing to reach their mark. There were bright flashes of flak as well as the sound of bombs exploding well in the distance. The horizon just lit up like as the bombs hit their targets, most of those targets apparently on the outskirts of Baghdad, several miles from here at the Al Rashid Hotel near the downtown district where most foreign journalists are staying. At one point during the night, we saw a huge fireball, in fact, several fireball explosions only a mile or two from the hotel as the Allied bombs hit what appeared to be a number of strategic targets, one of them the International Communications Center. After that, most telephone service out of Iraq was cut off. The air raid ended after about 3 hours, but then resumed again during the daylight hours today, and you can still hear exploding bombs and anti-aircraft fire sporadically during these daylight hours.
Gary, are you able to actually see any of the American or Allied warplanes streaking over the city? Have you actually been able to witness any of the bombing runs?
No, it's very difficult to see them. At night, of course, it's just next to impossible, but you can hear them occasionally. Once in a while, when they make a really low bombing run, you actually hear the sound of that jet racing past the hotel if the particular target is near enough. And we did hear the sounds of these attack jets a number of times last night and during the day today.
Now, what about the scope of destruction in the city? Is there widespread destruction, or is it, you said it was pinpoint bombing, is it limited to targets or close to the intended targets?
We have been unable to drive around the entire city. I took one run this morning and saw very little evidence of any damage. One of the telecommunications centers, part of the building, was severely damaged, and our cameraman saw several towers on the International Communications Center toppled over. But for the most part, the city has not been destroyed. On top of that, many of the targets were way in the suburban areas of Baghdad, and we've been unable to get to those areas to inspect for damage. The city itself looks almost completely intact. As a matter of fact, during the day-to-day, there is traffic on the street, hardly as much as normal. An incredible amount of people standing on street corners trying to find taxis and other rides. Most taxis apparently just didn't come to work today. It's very difficult to get transportation here. On top of that, as we drove through the streets, we saw a very pronounced increase in military presence. Soldiers in uniform wearing ammunition vests, holding weapons posted on a number of street corners and in front of major buildings. The city is obviously in a state of shock that this attack occurred. I think most people here never really believed it would ever happen. Last night, several hours after the initial air raid, Radio Baghdad broadcast a speech by Saddam Hussein, who continued his defiant attitude and declared that Iraq would emerge victorious, ultimately win this war.
Thank you, Gary, and once again, take care. That is Gary Shepard reporting live for us this morning from Baghdad. We will take a break, and our coverage will continue in just a moment.
Good morning. I'm Lisa McCree again here with Quinn Matthews with our continued coverage. Again, if you're just joining us this morning, we are breaking in to cover the commercial holes left by ABC. ABC's running commercials during their coverage, and we've chosen to give you what updates we could, latest on the wires, things of that nature. Apparently, four of the major oil companies in the world have frozen their oil prices in reaction to what's happened. A little bit later on Daybreak, we'll have the latest for you on the financial markets here in the States. The stock market will be open very soon, and we'll have David Johnson, I'm sure, to fill us in on what's happening there.
There's this offer to Iraq from the United States. This from the United States ambassador to the UN. Ambassador Thomas Pickering said, and I quote here, that Iraq can avoid further destruction by unconditional, immediate, and complete withdrawal from Kuwait, he said. He said, the coalition forces are striking at military and strategic targets. He said, our goal is not the destruction, the occupation, or the dismemberment of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait. So here we have an offer from the United States to Iraq to give up, have a complete unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait, and then the hostilities will cease.
And that, of course, is the hope, especially before any ground troops really fully engage. Again, early, if you've been sleeping in the last few hours, the attack by the Allied U.S.-led forces have been air attacks on key military communications munitions targets throughout Iraq, in Baghdad, in the western outskirts of Baghdad, and in Kuwait itself. And apparently those have been successful. The U.S., of course, wanting to break the lines of communication between Saddam Hussein in Baghdad and all of those heavily fortified troops down in Kuwait. And that seems to be successful. We will know a little bit later on just how successful the second air attack has been as it continues on. And we will, of course, be updating you as we can. We'll be back at just 5 minutes before the hour. Right now, we're going to go back to ABC.
Continuing our coverage of the Gulf War for you this morning, we are now told that President Bush is up and around at the White House, and apparently a couple of moments ago he did pay a very brief visit to the White House press room. In response to a question, apparently, the president simply said that things are going well in the Gulf War. That is about all he had to say at this point. We expect a little more from him, hopefully later in the day. We should also mention to you that President Bush has taken action when it comes to the subject of oil. He ordered the oil reserves from the nation's strategic oil stockpile to be offered up for sale in oil markets all around the country over the next 30 days. This has never been done before except in test cases, and what it will do is put 1.12 billion barrels of oil, or I should say millions barrels of oil a day, on sale in an effort to stabilize market prices. We want to talk about oil and the oil markets and the financial markets in general right now, because they have really been kind of erratic as a result of the crisis itself and now the war. We're being joined by Joseph Stanislaw. He is in our London bureau right now. He's the managing director for Cambridge Energy Associates. He's a world oil analyst. Mr. Stanislaw, first of all, thank you for joining us today, sir.
Good morning.
What can you tell us about the decision to plunge into America's oil stockpile?
It was a decision that was very much anticipated by most actors in the oil market. In fact, it's been thought that that would happen for quite some time on the onslaught of war or military action. In fact, last week in Paris, the International Energy Agency, of which the U.S. is a member, met to decide upon contingency actions such as this and agreed to this sort of recourse if necessary.
Now, what are oil markets doing today? There was a surge in price, apparently, but it's dropped off a bit, hasn't it?
Right. Oil markets behaved as one would expect. On the first announcement of military conflict and war, the markets panicked and shot up $3 to $5. But once one saw the first reports of the apparent wave of optimism of the success of the action, the oil market settled back down to look at fundamentals, and the fundamentals of the market are we have a lot of oil, and that caused the price to drop about $10.
Now, what happens if this turns out to be more complicated than it certainly has appeared to be during the morning? What happens if it's drawn out?
What you find happen is normal in the oil market,
it will react violently in both directions. If we begin to get some bad news, which we hope we don't, the markets will react in an upward direction very quickly. And equally, if upon hearing bad news and hearing then some good news, the market will come quite down again quickly.
If there is the possibility of well, first of all, is there a possibility of a shortage here if this continues?
If things continue as they seem to be, and the market has discounted the worst-case scenario as a result of success in the wave of optimism, one's looking at an oil market that fundamentally is crude long. There's plenty of oil. There is no shortage on the horizon. In fact, there's more likely to be a surplus on the horizon if things continue the way they do now.
Is there any sort of psychological impact likely as a result of the decision to use the strategic oils?
Psychologically, it should prevent what one would consider a normal reaction, a knee-jerk reaction in this type of environment, which is to hoard. If one knows that the U.S. is prepared to release 1.1 million barrels a day, and also we know the other members of the IEA countries will be prepared to release about 1 million barrels a day of government-held inventories, that should stop the knee-jerk reaction. There's plenty of oil in the system.
We're being told now the Saudi Arabian oil fields will supply about 5 million barrels of crude a day to the oil market. And apparently, obviously, the fears that Saddam Hussein would sabotage the markets thus far have not borne any fruit. But what happens to the pipelines? What happens to the depots? What happens to the transportation systems in a crisis like this?
Right. If one takes them in order, the pipelines in Saudi Arabia certainly could be hit and damaged, but they're easily repairable. Everyone in the business can come to the rescue and repair them. If you look at the refineries in Saudi Arabia, if they are hit and damaged, it takes a lot longer to repair, but they can be repaired. The pipelines in Saudi Arabia move about 3 million barrels a day towards the west, and then you have the loading facilities on the east coast about 250 to 400 kilometers south of Kuwait that move around 4 to 4.5 million barrels a day by sea.
Mr. Stanislaw, I'm sorry, I got to cut you off there, sir. We are tight for time right now because of a local break we must take, but we do appreciate your being with us. We'll break now for local stations and their updates, and we will continue in our coverage in just a moment.
This is a News 8 special report. The war in the Mideast.
Welcome back to the Channel 8 Newsroom. I'm Quinn Matthews, Lisa McCree here also.
We're doing a little show and tell right now in case you only take one newspaper like most people. Fort Worth Star-Telegram, war is the headline today. The Dallas
word says it.
That's it. Dallas Morning News, Allies strike Iraq. And the Dallas Times-Herald, we're at war. And basically, that sums it all up. But Quinn, we're going to do a little chronology for people right now, right?
Here is the latest. The U.S. and its allies have pounded Iraq with 2 waves of airstrikes. The first one was before dawn Iraqi time. The second one about 7 hours later. The object was not to destroy Iraq, the U.S. says, or even to get at Saddam Hussein personally, but to break his military might and drive Saddam Hussein and his troops from Kuwait. Saddam apparently survived the night of fire that rained down on his capital. He is still defiant in a radio message. We don't know if that was live or taped, however. Now, apparently, no Iraqi missiles have hit any targets. There's a report that some missiles had been fired, but either didn't reach their targets or were shot down. Reporters in Baghdad report little damage in the downtown area of the capital. However, they believe that most of the bombing was done on the outskirts. Also, Lisa, as you've been talking about this morning, no confirmed report of any ground fighting.
Well, the thing about the no civilian targets being hit, that was one of the goals, of course, was to hit military targets, communications, munitions centers, that sort of thing, and to take out any of Saddam's capability to launch an offensive against Israel. Of course, that would very much complicate the whole situation. Rhetoric and bravado in Arab politics are as important as action very much, and so we don't really know if he had a weapon that was capable of inflicting any real damage on Israel or not. Of course, Israel was prepared for the worst. The biggest fear, of course, would be that Saddam would ignite that powder keg, which is Israel over there, and of course drag the Palestinians into it. Then there's another question, is this thing really going to be over when it's over? There's an offer this morning from the United States. U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering says if Iraq will pull out of Kuwait now, they can avoid further attacks on their nation. No response again from Saddam on that. And if that happens, if Saddam in fact does surrender, there will still be a question about security. Will there be revenge attacks or hate attacks around the world? There's that likelihood is very much there.
Yeah, I think terrorism is clearly on everyone's mind. The Allied invasion of Iraq is, in fact, affecting security and travel at major airports across the country. DFW Airport began beefing up security just minutes after last night's invasion. Here's more from Channel 8's Dave Evans.
Most arriving passengers at DFW Airport learned from their pilots before landing that the U.S. was at war. Dozens of connecting passengers then gathered around TV sets or radios to listen for the latest from the Gulf. For many, it was difficult.
Yes, it was. I also have a 20-year-old son, so it was definitely on my mind a lot. There was extra security in Madrid, and they closed off the streets around the American Embassy in Madrid this morning. That was on the news. So that added more fear and apprehension.
Shortly after the invasion, the FAA ordered even tighter security at the airport, going to what's called an Alert 3 level. That's just one step below the most serious category possible. Public Affairs Director Joe Dealey Jr. says DFW has never had a Level 3 alert.
The most noticeable impact here at DFW will be that there will that ticketed passengers, only ticketed passengers, will be permitted beyond the pre-board screening checkpoint area.
Airline and airport officials came to a late-night meeting to discuss new security measures. They know the FAA could order a Level 4 alert later this week, especially if any American airport is targeted by terrorists.
The most noticeable effect of going from threat level 3 to 4 will be a discontinuation of curbside check-in of luggage. In the event that happens, there will certainly be some inconvenience and disruption for the flying public.
So far, no one has even hinted at any kind of threat at DFW. Still, security forces are ready, and many passengers here say a little inconvenience is worth the extra safety. Dave Evans, Channel 8 News, DFW Airport.
I think we should underscore at this point there is no evidence that there has been any terrorism, any acts of terrorism, but it's something I know people want to keep their eyes out for.
That's right. Another quick note, we are going to be back at 6 o'clock for News 8 Daybreak with all the latest. Of course, we'll have the military information as well as financial information because the stock exchange will be open at that time. We can tell you more about oil prices. If you have relatives, friends, or family and you're concerned and need to know where to call, some of those information numbers at Fort Hood and Fort Bliss, call our contact date number 988-7888, and they'll be happy. We have a staff there to answer your questions.
And we will be monitoring ABC and CNN and see you in 1 hour.
Once again, it is just about 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Baghdad. It is daylight, and there apparently at this hour is still fighting going on in the skies over Iraq. The fighting began late in the evening, early morning Baghdad time. It was about 7 p.m. Eastern time when the first wave of American and Allied jets plunged across the border, striking targets inside Iraq, deep inside Iraq, hitting several strategic sites in and around the capital city of Baghdad. We're told that the Defense Ministry and also the post office center in the capital city have been struck, along with a variety of other targets as well. We'll be talking to Gary Shepard, who's in Baghdad, in just a moment. But first, we want to fill you in on some of the other related information regarding these strikes deep inside Iraq and the assault that President Bush last night said was aimed at starting the liberation of Kuwait. The early word that we got from both American and British officials is that the massive assaults by American airplanes did not result in any casualties, that all of the hundreds of airplanes, the Americans, the British, the French, the Saudi Arabians, even the Kuwaitis, managed to make their strikes and return safely. They did about a 3-hour run, took a break, and there was another turnaround of the jets going back in later in the day. Those jets are also striking targets. There have been conflicting reports now about the success of them. Many of them were led in by the F-15 Eagles, fighter planes that show not only great capability to handle air-to-air combat, but as you can see, that pilot in the cockpit getting ready to take off in the initial wave they went into Iraq early this morning, also are magnificent performers when it comes to bombing runs. These planes, these F-15s, these Eagles, actually are capable of carrying almost as much in the way of armaments as the famed B-17 of World War II bomber fame. That is the Eagle, a plane developed during the mid-1970s by McDonnell Douglas, modified to be one of the most effective bombers that the world has seen right now. ABC's Gary Shepard was on the receiving end of what the F-15 and all the other attack planes were dishing out overnight in Baghdad, and he joins us live. Gary?
Mike, we were, of course, on the 7th floor of the Al Rashid Hotel, just outside the downtown district of Baghdad, during the middle of the night when the air raid arrived here and began. It was about 20 minutes before 3 o'clock in the morning, and the sky was completely dark. Of course, there were the normal night lights on, the Baghdad skyline lit up as it normally was, and then all of a sudden, the sky just erupted in an incredible display. It almost looked like a fireworks display on the finally, after a while, the sound of bombs in the distance, we could finally hear the echoes of it reaching our vantage point at the hotel. It was an incredible display that lasted off and on for about 3 hours. It was hard to believe that we were actually seeing what we were seeing. The number of rounds, anti-aircraft rounds, fired by the Iraqis must certainly have totaled hundreds of thousands. During the days leading up to this air raid attack, we noticed on the tops of buildings here in Baghdad anti-aircraft batteries manned by a squad of Iraqi soldiers. They were obviously all operating last night shooting into the sky, but apparently not hitting their targets. As you pointed out, all of the attacking planes returned to their bases. There were no casualties. So it was a visual show on the part of the Iraqis, but they had nothing to show for it. The Allied attack hit a number of strategic targets here. It was difficult for us to confirm exactly what locations were hit, but we do know that the international communications building was severely damaged, and that knocked out all outgoing phone calls from Iraq, and in addition, several other strategic targets.
Gary, can you tell us...
It is mid-afternoon here in Baghdad. It is 5 minutes after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there have been continued daytime attacks off and on during the day. We occasionally hear anti-aircraft fire and the sounds of bombs exploding. Mike?
Gary, can you tell us about the extent of destruction? This was not some sort of massive raid on civilian targets, as far as we can tell. It was more of a pinpoint type of raid on strategic locations?
That seems to be the case, but I must confess, we are not allowed out of the hotel right now to check on the damage to the targets. Earlier, I was out driving around the city, and there was very little evidence of damage. We are told that much of the targeting was on the far outskirts of Baghdad. We've been unable to drive that distance to check and see exactly what was hit. In the main part of the capital itself, there's very little evidence of bombing damage, and as a matter of fact, vehicles are driving on the streets, and there are even people trying to find rides. There are very few taxi cabs out today. Most of the drivers apparently stayed home, because of the attack, and there are people that are literally standing on street corners trying to thumb rides to get from one place to another.
Thank you, Gary. ABC's Gary Shepard, the man who brought you the news of the attack first last night on ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings at about 6:50 Eastern Time, who is still there watching the scene as it unfolds right now. We have a late report in, by the way. Some of the airmen who took part in the initial wave of attacks by the Allied forces are now saying that some Iraqi planes actually turned tail and ran north to avoid being attacked by American planes. One of the airmen is identified as a Captain Genter Drummond, and he said that we had no adversaries, that those that did get airborne went north, away from the Allied forces. Bill Redeker is near an airbase in Saudi Arabia, and he can give us an idea of exactly the level of activity as it occurred and perhaps as it occurs as well. Bill?
Mike, as Gary pointed out from Baghdad, the aerial campaign continues. Many of the planes being launched right here, from about an airbase from about a half a mile from here. They are the F-15 Strike Eagles, which you alluded to earlier. They have been flying north, across the border and into Baghdad, and some of those crews have been returning back here with stories of what the operation looked like and what it felt like. Now, correspondent Jim Hickey has a report from a joint Air Force and Marine Air facility.
The power was awesome. In fact, one commander at this Persian Gulf Air Base called it the most powerful air armada that has ever been formed.
And they're ready, the airplanes are ready, and now their mission is being executed. That brings a tremendous self-satisfaction to me as the wing commander.
At precisely 1:26 in the morning, 5:26 in New York, the Air Force 35th Tactical Fighter Wing launched the attack. Leading them all, squadron leader Lieutenant Colonel George Walton from San Antonio, Texas.
Feels very good to be started, and it's the road home, the quickest road home for us.
First up, more than a dozen F-4 Wild Weasels. They went after Iraqi surface-to-air SAM missile sites. With their afterburners glowing hot in the dark, the jets quickly disappeared in the clear, cool, and very dark night. No moon, perfect for an air assault. As some of the Wild Weasels headed straight to Baghdad, FA-18s from the 3rd Marine Air Wing roared to the skies. Wave after wave of aircraft took off, including A-6 intruders and radar-jamming electronic warfare planes. Officials here say the first missiles hit Baghdad at 3 a.m., 7 p.m. in New York, on time and on target. By dawn, the first pilots were back. They included Colonel Walton. Mission accomplished. He blew up SAM missile sites just outside Baghdad.
This was tremendous. Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree. Looked like everything in downtown was, fireworks were going off, a lot of AAA, impacts on the ground. I think we hit there just about the time we're 40 miles south is when they're pounding targets in Baghdad.
As Walton and the other pilots headed off for breakfast, ground crews rearmed their planes. They will be going after Iraq again and again.
Military commanders fully expected Iraqi retaliation on this airbase. In fact, there were 2 air raid alerts during the night. Iraqi missiles apparently were detected headed in this direction, but local officials said they fell short. This is Jim Hickey with the television pool at an airbase in the Persian Gulf.
Again, those sorties are continuing. As a matter of fact, within the last 20 seconds, while Jim was filing his report, we saw over my left shoulder 2 combat aircraft just take off from a field about a quarter of a mile from where we're seated. I believe they were British Tornadoes that were headed up. And about 5 minutes before that, a squadron of 4 F-15 Strike Eagles took off from a runway on the other side of us. So the campaign does continue. It's what the Air Force predicted it would do and is apparently following out. On the ground, we can confirm that Iraqi artillery did in fact strike and set on fire an oil storage tank in Khafji, Saudi Arabia. Now that's a small community located on the border between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, just on this side of the border. Saudi officials have told ABC News that the tank was about half filled of gas and it would caught on fire, but that was the only damage suffered. Again, the air campaign continues with the multiple sorties being launched here from an air base in eastern Saudi Arabia. Mike?
Bill, we've got an awful lot of reports, mostly unsubstantiated information, about other incidents that have allegedly occurred. One of the reports tended to deal with the possibility or allegations of actual ground combat. Do you know anything about that?
Well, we've heard those same reports here. I believe the Iranian news service is carrying some of those reports, and also a Kuwaiti minister is carrying those reports. We checked with Kuwaiti officials here and Saudi officials here. They cannot confirm those reports that allegedly have a ground attack beginning in the Hafr el-Batan area or north of that. Now, that's in the northwest sector. That's west and north of us here. It is not on the coastal plain. That's an area where the multinational forces, which are made up of the Arab groups and the French, are positioned. So far, no confirmation. It would seem a little premature at this point for that to begin.
Well, it's sunny right there now, Bill. It's 2:12 Baghdad time, and you obviously have made it through a night where there were a number of sirens going off and alarms about potential missile attacks. What became of them? Were these false alarms?
We're still checking that out. It happened twice to us, and it apparently happened on the entire eastern province here, because the 82nd Airborne earlier today went under the same alert status, put on the chemical warfare suits, took the pills that are meant to deaden the nerve endings against nerve gas attacks, and were put into shelters, as were members of the media here where I'm posted. As far as we know, no missiles hit any targets or entered our area, so they were alerts, but nothing really came of them.
Thank you, Bill. ABC's Bill Redeker live for us this morning in Saudi Arabia. There have been a number of pleas for peace coming from a variety of world leaders today. One of the most important calls in terms of likely influence came from the Vatican, where Pope John Paul II today issued his call, urging that peace be restored in the Persian Gulf, and that negotiation and diplomacy prevail in a time of great violence. We will take a break right now, come back in a couple of moments, and when we do, we'll give you the latest information on the reaction from the White House and the rest of Washington. Stay with us.
When creating the new G20 midsize luxury sedan from Infiniti, these were just a few of the amenities we kept in mind. Seating surfaces that are fitted with leather, a cabin that heightens the level of comfort and stretches the limits of space. Of course, with 16 valves and 140 horsepower, that mind also has an alter ego.
This motel doesn't have 8-inch masonry walls like Red Roof Inn. Still, you meet some interesting people. You were saying?
Well, I grew up in Akron.
Of course you did.
But when I was 12, we moved to Findlay, where my...
Next time, hit the roof. Red Roof Inns. Call 1-800-THE-ROOF.
Right now, for every night you stay at a Red Roof Inn, we'll give you something very special to drive away with when you check out. A brand new Lincoln. Get $5 cash back for every night you stay through February 2nd.
You suffer from minor arthritis pain? Boy, I do. I'm Danny Thomas. I just found Arthritis Hot. I rub it in, it warms away the pain fast, and the relief lasts for hours. Arthritis Hot. Sure works for me.
Color Tile's Bigger Better Sale. Ceramic tile, great savings. Armstrong tile galore. Stacks of DuPont Stainmaster carpet. Multitudes of mini blinds and more. Thousands of selections and values at Color Tile now.
It's almost as if someone once said, just in case people like sunshine and water, we'd better make Florida. And we'd better make miles of beautiful beaches and places like St. Augustine and Key West, just in case people want to go to them. There are over 4 million miles of roads in Alamo territory all across America. And every day, with every car nationwide, only Alamo gives you all those miles for free, including the ones that run through a state that's named after sunshine.
Continuing our coverage of the war in the Gulf right now, specifically honing in on exactly what is happening in Washington, the reaction from the power centers there and from the people who implemented the plan and put it into action late last night, early this morning, Baghdad time. We're going to check in, first of all, with Bill Greenwood at the White House. Bill, I understand the president was up early this morning.
He was indeed, Mike, and he is clearly pleased by the success of the first phase of this operation, obviously knowing that there is still a long way to go, still a chance for great damage and casualties. But the president was in the Oval Office an hour ago, shortly after 5 o'clock Eastern time this morning, checking with the Situation Room, getting updated on the latest reports from the war zone, getting a full briefing. That full, complete briefing will occur about an hour from now, but he has at least got the initial reports from the evening. And he stuck his head in the White House briefing room for just a second, startling the few reporters that were there. He said, I normally get up at 5 o'clock. I just wanted to say hi. A reporter asked the president, how's it going? And he said, things are going very well, just like you're reporting. The question is, will they keep going that way?
Do we expect the president to make himself accessible throughout the day or the coming days, Bill?
There's nothing on his official schedule, Mike. He has a luncheon with the vice president. We normally do not see that. There will be a briefing, as I said, about an hour or two from now with his senior advisors. The secretaries of state and defense are coming here to see how things are going and discuss the future planning of this war. We have no way of knowing if he will make himself available, but I'd be surprised if somehow we don't see him.
Thank you, Bill. Going over to the State Department right now, Gene Meserve is standing by live there to let us know how the people at that end of the situation are viewing what's transpiring. Gene, from a diplomatic end, obviously, state has to consider diplomacy failed in a certain respect. Then again, it succeeded in putting together a coalition. How do they view it this morning?
Well, I think obviously the coalition is held together, and that's got to be good news here. There hasn't been any sort of official reaction. As Bill mentioned, the first thing on the Secretary of State's schedule this morning is a trip over to the White House to meet with the National Security Advisor and Secretary of Defense and perhaps the President. Apart from that, his schedule today is clear. I think generally here there's still disappointment that diplomacy failed. There is perhaps disappointment that they haven't heard anything from Saddam Hussein that indicates that he's willing to compromise or pull out of Kuwait at this point. Apart from that, I would say things here are beginning to get a little tense. Security here has been stepped up to an amazing degree. C Street, on which this building is located, has been sealed off. You have to show an ID simply to get onto the street. There are barricades in the driveway. When I came in earlier this morning, there were padlocks and chains on the doors here. So I think within the building for the general staff, I think it's a state of tension.
What do you suppose, from what you've been able to glean in attitudes over there, what do you suppose the attitude would be if Saddam Hussein were suddenly to change his mind, go on the radio and say, I'd like to cut a deal?
I think they'd listen to him. They'd want to hear what he had to say, make sure that he wasn't talking again about linkage and other things that are unacceptable to this country. They want to see full compliance with the 12 UN resolutions. If he said he was willing to do that, if he was willing to get out of Kuwait unconditionally, immediately, they would be happy to hear those words.
All right, we're going to switch up to New York City right now to the United Nations. Correspondent Greg Dobbs is there. Greg, any new efforts anticipated in an effort to try to bring this thing to a halt?
No, Mike, and as a matter of fact, the headline from here at the United Nations is what didn't happen. There was no call in the aftermath of hostilities. There was no call for an immediate formal ceasefire. Even though under the rules of the United Nations Security Council, if any member state wants to make such a request, it must be considered. As it happens, the very first delegate to the UN to speak publicly on the subject was the Cuban delegate, who very proudly told me he has systematically voted against the United States, meaning for Iraq, in the case of every UN resolution against Iraq. Of course, he has lost. He said he is searching for a way to impose an immediate ceasefire, but he has no realistic expectation of support from the Security Council, which he characterized as a tool of the United States. Remember, the Security Council actually legalized the hostilities. Here's a bit of videotape showing the different tone we heard from different people at the UN, including first the Secretary General, then the ambassadors from the United States and Kuwait.
I regret that hostilities have started, but those hostilities are in the framework of a resolution of the United Nations Security Council.
Is there going to be a message for Hussein?
I think the message for Hussein was just delivered.
I welcome the liberation of my country.
In fact, Mike, the Security Council did meet for about an hour and a half, but all they did, consistent with UN resolutions, was hear the United States, the Kuwaitis, the Saudis report on military action in the Gulf. And afterwards, I asked the American ambassador, Thomas Pickering, when it might be appropriate to think about a ceasefire. And he said, when UN resolutions are implemented. In other words, when Iraq leaves Kuwait.
It certainly seems like, at this point, Greg, the United States really doesn't need or want anything from the United Nations.
No, it doesn't seem to, and most of its allies here at the UN are lining up along with the United States, virtually ignoring the subject, at least for the time being.
Do they walk around, though, with a sense of failure? Obviously, Javier Perez de Cuellar came back from his Baghdad meeting with Saddam Hussein clearly depressed. Do the other people who make their living in the diplomatic business there feel that they, in a way, also failed?
But no, there's no sense of failure here, because after all, there was resolution after resolution demanding that Iraq leave Kuwait, demanding that Iraq return Kuwait to the legitimate government there, so that they feel that the final resolution on the subject, the 12th resolution, which is numbered 678, simply brought everything together and gave him plenty of chance to get out. So yes, a failure in the sense that people finally had to go to war, but a success in the sense that it is the United Nations that legalized the war and not just individual member states.
There's been an awful lot of speculation that regardless of how the Persian Gulf crisis ended, either through diplomacy or war, that ultimately it would come down to somebody deciding somewhere to push hard enough to actually get some sort of international Mideast peace conference, bringing together the Arabs and the Israelis, or at least trying to. Are we picking up anything on that yet?
Only momentum. The words Mideast Peace Conference continue to be on the delegates' lips. Those words have been uttered more here in the past 48 hours than probably ever before. And what that means is, whether he has earned it or not, Saddam Hussein has created the momentum for that kind of thing eventually to happen, probably under the auspices of the United Nations.
All right, Greg, thank you very much. Greg Dobbs at the UN, Jean Meserve at State, and Bill Greenwood at the White House. Our thanks to all of you. We will take a break right now and continue in just a moment.
Before they could
could walk, they wanted to dance. Before they could talk, they wanted to sing. But they needed a lot of heart and desire before they could get to Broadway and make it on a chorus line. Now this Broadway legend is back and on tour. But if you want tickets, get to the box office early and get out your Visa card. Because this show won't be in town long, and it won't take American Express. Visa, it's everywhere you want to be.
I go to Lens Crafters because with my job, glasses in an hour are not just a convenience, they're a must.
Lens Crafters puts the whole lab right in the store to custom craft your top quality glasses in about an hour. Call Lens Crafters at 1-800-522-LENS.
Lean cuisine is 95% fat-free. Yet it tastes so good, some people can't believe it's that healthy. Believe it.
Okay, you're trying to decide between the Jeep Cherokee and the Isuzu Trooper. Let's weigh the facts, shall we? The Isuzu Trooper comes standard with four-wheel disc brakes and triple skid plates, more cargo space, a larger fuel tank, and more headroom. Oh, and one more. The Isuzu Trooper costs about $1,000 less.
The Isuzu Trooper at just $13,699. There's no comparison.
Ever feel too clumsy some mornings to make a pot of coffee? Wake up to Maxwell House filter packs. Coffee blended with Colombian beans. Pre-measured in their own filters. Because better beans do make better coffee. No fumbling, no bumbling. You get a perfect pot every time. Maxwell House filter packs blended with Colombian beans. Because better beans make better coffee.
Continuing our coverage of the Persian Gulf War this morning, we have been telling you throughout the morning that the initial reports from both the British Prime Minister John Major and also from American officials were that no casualties occurred, at least not on the first run. We were told that all of the fighters and bombers that went out on the initial strike into Iraq and Kuwait returned safely. We're now being told that the British Defense Ministry does confirm there have been casualties. We believe they're talking about British casualties, but at this point we don't know the extent. We don't know exactly how many, we don't know where they occurred, nor do we know on which raid, whether it was the first or the second raid, which apparently continues at this hour. We're going to shift over to Sheila McVicker now, our correspondent in Amman, Jordan, for an update on the situation there. Sheila?
Good morning, Mike. Well, things have changed quite considerably here in the last hour. The rules and conditions under which television journalists have been working here since sometime in August, shortly after the invasion of Kuwait, have been changed in the last hour and a half. The Ministry of Information people here, who usually issue us permission so that we can work on the streets of Amman and abide by Jordanian law, have suddenly announced that they will no longer be granting any permission for any television crews to be working on the streets of Amman. They say that this is a new order given to them by Jordanian security services, and that the order is being made in the interest of our own security. It means basically that any television crew working on the streets of Amman, or in fact anywhere in Jordan now, is in fact in violation of Jordanian law and can be brought back to the hotel by the police. It is interesting in that in the last 2 hours, the mood on the streets of Amman has changed quite considerably. I was downtown just about an hour ago outside one of the main mosques, and there was a large crowd gathering there, mostly men, which is quite unusual in Amman. You usually see a lot of women, but this is mostly men of all ages who were surrounding Westerners on the street. It was not a very pleasant experience. And sometime after that, when we had another crew go down to a similar location, our cameraman was told, when he told people who were questioning him that he was waiting for a Jordanian friend, he was told that he had no friends in Jordan, and that if he didn't leave, he would be seriously hurt. There have been reports that some Western journalists have been roughed up a bit, but I don't believe that anybody has been seriously hurt. People here are very angry. They feel very betrayed by what's happened.
Sheila, this comes in the face of the urging by King Hussein when he took to the airwaves yesterday, urging Jordanians to continue to be open and warm to foreigners in the country. We're also, Sheila, hearing a report now that the Egyptian ambassador's residence in Amman was stoned by a crowd of people. They don't describe who those people are, apparently angry at the U.S.-Egyptian Confederation. Do we anticipate the situation worsening throughout the day, or are authorities doing anything to try to get it under control?
I'm sorry. I think that it's very likely that the tensions will continue to rise here. People in downtown Amman, as they are throughout the city, are listening to their radios. They're trying to find out what's going on in Baghdad and the confrontation now between Iraq and the Allies. And they are growing increasingly unhappy about what they are hearing. I was speaking to a senior official of the Palestine Liberation Organization in Tunis a couple of hours ago, who told me that he was not having a very nice day and that the news was indeed bad, but this was just the start and perhaps things would turn around. We must remember that the majority of the population in Jordan are in fact Palestinians, and like the Palestine Liberation Organization, they supported Saddam's support for their cause when Saddam Hussein linked his withdrawal from Kuwait to an international peace conference on other Middle East issues, including the Palestinian cause. That was for the Palestinian people. It represented something that might give them a breakthrough that they had not previously been able to attain, and they now, I think, see that possibility slipping away from them.
Thank you, Sheila. ABC's Sheila McVicker reporting from Amman, Jordan. We're going to switch over now to Dubai. ABC correspondent Mike Lee has an update on the situation there. Mike, you heard Saddam Hussein earlier today, didn't you, on the radio?
Mike, we've had a steady stream of statements out of Baghdad radio, mainly bluster, in fact, one time from Saddam himself. I've had a second listen to Saddam's speech this morning, defiant but calm. He was not hysterical, for whatever that's worth. And it also proves that, of course, he did survive the attack, along with the additional evidence that we received that he may have been seen at the television station this morning. As I said, a lot of bluster, no specific mention of a missile attack forthcoming against Israel. There's no diplomatic overtures in any of these messages. There's no mention of the extent of damage in Iraq or Kuwait, only that Iraq will win. Much of the rhetoric we've heard in the past that they are believers and the West is not, are representing the non-believers. And there was a specific appeal to the Saudi military by Iraqi radio just a few moments ago, saying that right now they supported King Fahad, but they would soon turn against him and fight on the side of the Iraqis. They also mentioned that Israel will be smashed, but once again, there was no specifics on that, and they called it Bush's personal war.
Stand by for a second, Mike. We want to advise viewers just joining us right now that you are watching special coverage of the Persian Gulf War on a special edition of ABC's World News this morning. We're talking with correspondent Mike Lee, who's in Dubai. He has been listening to various radio broadcasts, including a broadcast by Saddam Hussein reacting to the Allied attack on his country. Mike, have you been able to gather any sort of reaction from the locals there as to their response to what's happened, and any reaction perhaps to what they've heard from Hussein on the radio?
The reaction here in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates and the lower Gulf, is one of relief, because finally they see some action being taken. They felt very threatened by Saddam Hussein because he had blamed the United Arab Emirates along with Kuwait for driving down Iraq's oil revenues, which led up to the invasion. So they're very relieved here to see this underway.
All right, Mike, we're going to shift over now to Barry Dunsmore, who's in Riyadh. A very busy evening, Barry. Have things quieted down at all there?
Well, as a matter of fact, they have, Mike. Things are very quiet, and as we talked during the night about the possibility of various and sundry briefings, the way things have worked out is that nothing has happened. The Saudi Arabian briefing, which was supposed to have been done by a Saudi brigadier, was first put back a few minutes and then put back a couple of hours, and now it will be sometime in the future that we do not know. As for the Americans, they say that they will give us a briefing later in the day, but they're going to wait for the Pentagon. I think I also mentioned this to you during the night, that this does not really surprise me that an event of this magnitude, I think they're going to take their guidance from Washington, at least in these early hours. So as far as the military is concerned here, our information pretty slim pickings. On the civilian side, or the domestic side, Riyadh appears to be quite normal today. People have come to work. People have been in the streets. There have been no incidents that I am aware of. Of course, this is a place where the security is very tight, and it would appear that the Saudis are going to keep it that way. It certainly will have helped keeping things quiet, that the long forecast possibility that Israel would get into the war appears not to have happened, at least not yet. And that, of course, could be a factor in changing some attitudes among some people. But for the time being, things are quiet and, under the circumstances, quite normal.
Barry, you made reference to slim pickings in terms of American military sources coming forth with information. We are getting a plethora of information from a variety of Arabic media. You've obviously heard now the Radio Baghdad has broadcast a lot of claims and charges and statements by or in the name of Saddam Hussein. We are also hearing now from Oman Radio that huge oil storage tank, as they put it, a huge oil storage tank, was hit by some Iraqi shelling. They also claimed that an American F-15 was hit by gunfire, and the pilot had to bail out and eject into the sea. That was now being carried by the Iranian state television. A variety of wide reports. How reputable do you put any of these? Can you believe much of what you're hearing on the radio from any sources there right now?
Well, I can speak from the experience of a couple of other Middle East wars, Mike. The information that came on the radio, the Arab radios in the 1967 war and the 1973 war, was completely unreliable. As we know now, in 1967, for example, the Israelis basically had won the war in the first 3 hours when they had defeated the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. But for several days, the fever was being whipped up by Cairo radio, and there was no recognition of the military reality that had taken place. I would just simply say that whatever we hear on the radio in the next few hours, we should certainly take with very large grains of salt.
All right, Barry, thank you very much. ABC's Barry Dunsmore reporting live from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Back on the home front, there has been some unhappiness here with the U.S. military action, and we get a report now on demonstrations at home from ABC correspondent Brian Rooney.
The night America went to war. Within hours, the peace demonstrators were filling the downtown streets of western cities. In Portland, Oregon, in Seattle, Washington.
I feel sick at heart for the people who are going to suffer and die for nothing.
We don't want to see people in the Gulf die. We do not want to see Americans nor Arabs die.
In Denver, they sang.
We shall overcome someday.
In San Francisco, demonstrators filled some streets and burned a police car in their furious demand for peace. The night America went to war, some Americans had thoughts they've never had before.
I've got a couple of friends over there, and I'm suddenly really scared for them, and I'm scared for the country.
Feeling quite helpless and frustrated that in the last 20 years we don't seem to have moved forward anywhere after Vietnam.
I have a 19-year-old son who I'm concerned about. Whether the draft is going to be brought into effect, I don't know, but I am scared.
But those who supported the president's decision to fight were almost quiet in their determination.
I'd have to say overall, you know, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it right now. I feel very scared, I feel frightened, I feel concerned, but I also feel I support him now.
We as an American people have to kind of come together on, because we do need to, I mean, the action has been taken. For the time being, this is the choice of our country, and we should support that.
After 5 months leading to war, the debate erupted as suddenly as the explosions. At the candlelight vigil in Portland, speakers said they wanted no blood for big oil. But a soldier at Fort Lewis, Washington said this was about more than just oil.
I don't think this is about oil. You know, this is about a man who's going in and just taking over a country. You know, this is 20th century. You just don't do that nowadays.
Early last night, there were hopes for quick success, of stunning victory over Iraq in just several days. Some found it hard to believe.
I think it's going to be a lot longer than everybody thinks it is, and I think we're going to be very sorry. A whole lot of people are going to be very sorry, those people and us.
Already worried, at least, are the families of people serving in the Gulf. In Portland, the mother of 4 children, all in the Middle East.
I was hoping, you know, that maybe some peace would come out of this, maybe within another few days, but this guy's got to be taken care of. There's no doubt about it.
In San Francisco, the parents of 3 young men.
The greatest fear of losing all my 3 boys. It's hard enough losing one, even the thought of losing one. Now the possibility of losing all 3 is something that I wouldn't want to keep on living after that.
I'm just praying for all the soldiers and for their families too, because I know their hearts are breaking like mine.
It was a night for heartbreak, a night for hope, the night America went to war.
U.S. attacks Iraq. Read about it right here.
Brian Rooney, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Having fears about the situation is not something that's necessarily just restricted to people in the civilian end of life here. People in the military find themselves with some conflicting feelings at times, too, and certainly some second thoughts and emotions that are not necessarily comfortable. With that in mind, we're going to go right now to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and ABC News correspondent John Quinones, who picks up the story there. John?
Good morning, Mike. Fort Stewart, Georgia is the largest Army military base east of the Mississippi. Normally about 18,000 soldiers are based here. Well, now about 15,000 of them are in Saudi Arabia. Men and women whose families, of course, have been left behind here, and their families have been watching keenly developments overnight in the Gulf. This morning, there is some sense of relief with word that the American forces have been so effective in the air, at least. But there is still some concern here. In fact, overwhelming concern, some would say, anxiety, apprehension, as to what will happen when the men who are normally based here come face to face with Iraqi troops, if and when they do. Those soldiers here are ground forces, and they, of course, as yet have not seen any direct combat. Now, Major Donald Keeling is the public affairs officer here at the base. Your men cannot help, I suspect, but have morale boosted by how well relatively well the Air Force has done.
Well, you can't help but be encouraged by another service that does their job extremely professionally, so it can't help but enhance their morale and give them that feeling of confidence that they can do their job and they can rely on any other service to do its job too.
In the meantime, what are you doing here for the families of the soldiers based here?
Basically, what we've had here is support groups that have been in place since the division deployed. And last night, what you saw was many of these support groups starting to come together informally. Wives calling other wives, getting together, watching the TV, going through the news, talking with each other, and just kind of being a sounding board for another wife. And what you'll see now is regularly scheduled briefings, those kind of things that make sure that the environment here at Fort Stewart remains stable and nothing drastic changes.
Security is normally rather lax here. This is an open base, not so any longer.
Well, I wouldn't deem it lax, but it's very light, seeing that you have the two highways that go through here. But what you're going to see now is an enhanced watch of vehicles that go through here, random spot checks, those kind of things. We also are encouraging the families in the housing areas to be just a little bit extra cautious and question a car that goes through there that they may not recognize, or an individual walking through there that they have not seen before, and call the military police and have the military police check it out.
Still no word on when the men based here, men and women based here, will come back?
Obviously. Absolutely not, and that's been the magic question since day one, and we hope they return as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Major. Now, so, Mike, there is, again, some sense of relief because the Air Force has done relatively well, but still some apprehension here over what may yet be to come. Mike?
Thank you, John. ABC's John Quinones live for us this morning at Fort Stewart in Georgia. Now, the Pentagon has set up some special telephone numbers for those of you who have relatives in Operation Desert Storm. These numbers are for general information only, according to Pentagon officials. If you plan to use the numbers, you're asked to be ready to provide the correct spelling of the service member's last name, the Social Security number, the rank, and the military unit. Here now are the numbers. For Army, general information is 1-703 614-0739. For the Air Force, 1-800-253-9276. For the Navy, 1-800-732-1206. For the Marines, 1-800-523-2694. And for the Coast Guard, 1-800-283-8724. Once again, that is for general information. The lines, we're told, will be open at 8 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. We will take a break and continue with our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf in a moment.
There are over 3 million people on Manhattan Island every day.
How do they all fit?
Okay, everyone. Let's see how much you learned about Mexico this week.
Hoy vamos a analizar la economía de Japón, la diversidad de la economía.
¿Cómo es que los japoneses han hecho tanto?
Today, there are more students in more schools, in more places, learning about more subjects with Apple computers than with any other computers on Earth. In a world that's changing so fast, it's easy to get left behind. It's nice to know so many students have the power to stay ahead.
Take a guess. How can Americans save 4.2 million gallons of gasoline a day? Slow down. And save money, too. Let's put our energy into saving it.
I have just the thing for that cold.
Most kids think that medicine has to taste bad. But not grape-flavored Dimetap Elixir.
You like Dimetap?
Grape-flavored Dimetap Elixir. It relieves kids as well as colds.
With no down payment, Cadillac Smart Lease is very smart indeed. Because now, you can drive a sedan DeVille for just $499 a month for 36 months with no down payment. And with impressive highway mileage, an EPA estimated 26 miles per gallon highway, sedan DeVille makes your investment go even farther. No down payment and special terms. Another reason why the smart money is traveling Cadillac style.
With all the thousands and thousands of U.S. and allied troops in the Gulf right now, one wonders not only about how they're doing, but what kind of conditions they're doing it under. We called upon Spencer Christian to provide us with an appropriate forecast. Spence?
Good morning. We focus our attention this morning on weather conditions in the Persian Gulf. Over the last 18 to 24 hours, it has been rainy in that region, especially in the northern portion of Saudi Arabia and all across Iraq, and the system is now moving eastward. Of course, during the overnight hours, it was raining, or at least it was reported to be raining there, as Operation Desert Storm was initiated. Today, it is today there now, this afternoon, skies are clearing, but another rain-producing system is pushing into northern Saudi Arabia at this moment, and by day's end and into the evening hours, it probably will be cloudy and rainy once again over much of northern Saudi Arabia and Iraq. High temperatures this afternoon in that region will range generally from the mid to upper 60s into the low to mid 70s, so it is a very mild weather event there right now. Conditions are rather calm, and that's a look at the weather.
Thank you, Spencer. It is axiomatic that when you have a situation like this, there's an awful lot of confusion built into it. There are so many planes flying in such a tight airspace right now, and obviously a lot of information is not forthcoming as readily as we would like it. But we can tell you this, that this is the second of the two massive waves of air assaults that have been launched by U.S. and allied forces since about 7 p.m. Last night Eastern time. The planes spearheaded by, especially by the F-15, the Eagle, a fighter and a fighter bomber, started their waves of assaults upon Iraqi strategic sites last night, paused after 3 hours of what's being called the heaviest air attack in history, and resumed those attacks today. We are being told about some very serious hits inside of Iraq, but at this point we have no word at all on any American casualties. The first briefing we got indicated that all planes from the first sorties had returned safely. There is no word on the second, although British officials who had previously claimed that all of their planes on the first sorties returned safely now admit that there have been British casualties, although we do not know the number or the nature of those casualties at all. This news has put the world, the markets, the stock markets, the oil markets, commodities, things like that, into a situation where they pretty much resemble roller coasters. We want to try to get some background on what's happening there and why it's happening, so we're going to go to London right now and to a gentleman by the name of Michael Hughes. He is the chief economist at Barclays DZW at the London Stock Exchange. Good morning, Mr. Hughes.
Good morning to you.
What are we seeing right now with the markets? Is there any logic or to the rhyme or reason that they're going through?
I think there's a sense of relief in the sense that all the strategic news that's come out to date has been reasonably good, and this has tended to increase the probability that it will be a short war which will be followed by a credible peace. Now, there's a long way to go before you can be that confident of that judgment, but at least at this stage, the markets are reacting as if that is the scenario.
Where does the London market stand right now, sir?
It's about 47 points up. It has been up to 49 points up. It started the day a good part of that 40 points up, and we have seen some buying, not huge volumes, but clearly there have been some degree of good news for people to come back in to be buying shares here.
40 points is fairly substantial on the London market, is it not?
That's true. Remember also that throughout Europe there has been some degree of nervousness this week, following on from events in Lithuania last weekend. So the European markets, not just London, have been really quite weak at the beginning of the week, and they bounced quite dramatically today.
I understand the Tokyo market posted its 10th largest gain ever.
Well, that's true, and as I say, the relief has gone through the system. One of the interesting things, though, has been the degree to which the dollar, which has been one of the, seemed to be one of the havens of safety, has begun to weaken as the news has unfolded. This is not true of the Swiss franc, which is the other haven of relative safety, but the dollar does seem to have lost some of its momentum.
Understanding that people who work in the market don't like to predict, but if I ask you to go out on a limb here, what would you anticipate the U.S. market doing today? The New York in particular.
I think it'll start better, working on the basis of what we've seen elsewhere. To have another 50 to 100 points up initially is quite understandable. But of course, there can be other news that could come out between now and that opening, which might change that assessment.
Mr. Hughes, we appreciate your being with us this morning, sir. Michael Hughes from London. We'll take a break and be back with more news for you in just a moment.
There are over 3 million people on Manhattan Island every day.
How do they all fit?
Okay, everyone. Let's see how much you learned about Mexico.
Hoy vamos a analizar la economía de Japón, la diversidad de la economía.
¿Cómo es que los japoneses han hecho tanto?
Today, there are more students in more schools, in more places, learning about more subjects with Apple computers than with any other computers on Earth. In a world that's changing so fast it's easy to get left behind, it's nice to know so many students have the power to stay ahead.
Take a guess. How can Americans save 4.2 million gallons of gasoline a day? Slow down. And save money, too. Let's put our energy into saving it.
I have just the thing for that cold.
Most kids think that medicine has to taste bad. But not grape-flavored Dimetap Elixir.
You like Dimetap?
Grape-flavored Dimetap Elixir. It relieves kids as well as colds.
With no down payment, Cadillac Smart Lease is very smart indeed. Because now, you can drive a sedan DeVille for just $499 a month for 36 months with no down payment. And with impressive highway mileage, an EPA estimated 26 miles per gallon highway, sedan DeVille makes your investment go even farther. No down payment and special terms. Another reason why the smart money is traveling Cadillac style.
We have spent a great part of this morning discussing the various weapons systems, the geopolitical situation, and exactly trying to decipher what's happening in the Persian Gulf as best as we can understand it. We're being joined right now by John Lehman. He was the former Reagan administration Navy Secretary from 1981 to 87. It happens to be a reserve A-6 bombardier as well. Secretary Lehman, thank you very much for coming on in this morning, sir. What can you tell us, first of all, about what we're seeing in the performance of these systems? You were fairly strong in advocating the procurement of expensive and controversial weapon systems. Do you feel justified to a certain extent?
Well, I think that this really is a vindication of the emphasis that was placed in the 80s on high-tech, using the advantages that are unique to Western technology to use leverage against these totalitarian regimes that can generate lots of cannon fodder and don't care about taking casualties. I think what we've seen here is what is almost certainly a brilliantly planned and executed multi-service, multinational campaign built precisely around the uniqueness of the advantages that very few countries have, we have in this high-tech arena. That you know, today every third world country can fight pretty well with high-tech during the day. Only 2 or 3 or 4 countries in the world can fight at night this effectively because of the investment made in these high-tech systems.
But I must point out, sir, that these systems were invested in primarily because of the Soviet threat, and you weren't exactly seeing the United States go up against the Soviet Union here with its sophistication, were you?
No, but today there is no low-threat area because the proliferation of these smart weapons has really covered the globe. So we have exocet missiles, we have very good air defense systems, we have electronic warfare in the hands of third-world dictators. In fact, in Iraq, you've got virtually all of the best that money can buy from the Soviet Union and some from the French and other allies. So this was a real test of whether this investment of the 80s in the big Reagan buildup in high tech paid off, and very clearly it has.
Yes, now, you're standing in front of a map giving us a fairly good representation of what the area looks like and where the ships are based right now and where the air bases are. In terms of the way the plan is laid out, you don't see any shortcomings there at all?
Well, so far, all the indications are that everything went flawlessly, as well as any military campaign can go. You've got the carriers launching aircraft from the Gulf, from the Red Sea, 4 of them there. Many of them were staged through Air Force bases, so they were well coordinated, and then integrated with a very effective command and control that brought in the British Tornadoes, the U.S. Army night fighting helicopters, the French aircraft, the Étendards, the Navy A-6s, all-weather aircraft, the new F-15Es that were, again, very controversial, very expensive, very high-tech.
But you do also have some very expensive ships in a very small body of water, namely the Persian Gulf. You don't see any potential danger remaining there?
No, you'll recall when the Stark was hit by an exocet missile, at that time we thought Iraq was our friend, and the captain of the ship held his fire. He had the ability to defeat that exocet. Today, there's not going to be any doubt if an Iraqi aircraft approaches. In fact, it's inconceivable that an Iraqi aircraft could penetrate the airspace over the fleet, and if they did, a battleship, as we see here, or a carrier, has so much armor, 11 inches around the entire hull, for instance, on the battleship, that an exocet would just bounce off. So that's not really a concern. There are no submarines in the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, so there's no submarine threat. So there's really virtually no danger to the fleet because of the total air superiority that we have over the battlefield.
Well, let me ask you this, sir. Say things go as they seem to be going, and the United States defeats Iraq in short order, and that's only a supposition at this point. What's next? What do we do next?
Well, I think that what we've seen is what many expected, which is a total victory in the air, sweeping the air very early on, so that now the air can be used methodically to reduce the ability to inflict casualties by the Iraqi forces. And now that the air defenses have been heavily ground down, more needs to be done. Now the hard part comes, because eventually the ground forces are going to have to clean up this operation. And now we've got to see that every effort is made to apply this high tech to eliminate the artillery, to eliminate the ability to inflict casualties on the ground forces. And clearly that has been utmost in the on-scene commander's mind and the president's mind.
Secretary Lehman, I'm sorry, we have to cut you off there, but we do appreciate your expertise and your coming on in this morning, sir. I want to take a look right now to check to see what the war has done to the Gulf oil prices around the world. Crude oil prices did rise after the close of trading in New York, but after that they stabilized, and they actually fell a bit in Asia. North Sea Brent crude oil is now selling at some $24.25 a barrel. That is down $6 a barrel. You compare that to the $40 that oil was going for in New York last night, and you see that the psychology certainly plays a major part in what people are paying. By the way, six of the big oil companies say they are now freezing wholesale gasoline prices. They say they're trying to make sure that prices do not surge at the pump. Mobil Oil is one of those companies. The others include Atlantic Richfield, Sun Oil, Chevron, and Amoco. And that brings us up to date as of now, as far as we know. We should point out that as far as we can tell, the hostilities in the air over the Persian Gulf continue. Peter Jennings will be coming up with an update on the situation shortly in a special edition of Good Morning America. I'm Mike Schneider. Have a good morning.
Right now, we're all concerned with the outbreak of war in the Gulf. Monitoring the world 24 hours a day. Stay with the experience of ABC News.